Hey everyone, welcome back to the Direct to Video Connoisseur podcast. As always, this is Matt here, and I am joined once again by a friend of the show, Mitch from the Video Vacuum. Welcome back, Mitch.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt.
Yes, now I was wondering if you're going to say thanks for having me after we talk about the movie here that we ended up watching. But yeah, it's maybe we'll kind of dive right into sort of what we'll be chatting about today. But we're talking about the film Pups Alone, and I think part of the reason why, I don't know about you, but the moment I saw that this movie was released last year, I was intrigued and wanted to cover it in some fashion.
Well, I mean, it checks a lot of boxes for both of our websites. You know, it's got the cast and it's got the cheesy Christmas atmosphere going for it. And I think going into it, I think I won't say I had high hopes, but I was like, well, you've got a cast full of people that I'll pretty much watch anything that they're in, and this movie kind of tested that that theory of movie watching.
Yes, for sure. And the other thing too is this movie was directed by Alex Merkin. I think I'm pronouncing it Alex Merkin. And he did Altitude, which we both covered for the podcast a couple of years ago. I think it was in 2020. And we both enjoyed that one. So that was another thing that this movie, we felt like it had going for it.
Yeah, I mean, it reteams him and Dolph, and you know, that was the thing for me. I was like, well, Dolph is kind of being cast against type here, in this children's Christmas movie, and it kind of is kind of like a really kind of DTV version of the Disney Santa Claus, Santa Buddies kind of Air Buddies genre of talking dog movies, and I think he actually looked like he was having fun, kind of playing against type, playing like a role that I think you would see like a Richard Kind or John Lovitz play, like the smarmy co-worker that's trying to get one over on the hero. And it looked like he was having fun, but that didn't translate to the audience at all.
No, exactly. And I think you make a great point of the type of character he played, because I think that the Richard Kind comparison is probably perfect. And I think for people watching this, if you're familiar with Richard Kind's work, the idea of Dolph playing that character is probably enough to get you in the door, which, like you said, is probably it's enough to get you in the door, but when you get in the door, it's a little bit rough.
And just from the title alone, I feel like you kind of know what you're getting into. Pups Alone, you're like, okay, it's going to be Home Alone version, but with dogs, and it kind of it's funny because it says Pups Alone, but they're dogs. They're not actual pups. It might have been, not that it would save the movie, but they're not actually like cute little puppies. They're actually kind of just these kind of like ragtag group of dogs. And it's like, even from the, I felt misled there. I was like, okay, I came in expecting pups, little dogs, and these are full grown dogs. And, right away that was like strike one.
Right, because when you hear Pups Alone, you're right. Like, you think of almost like the situation of like maybe like the family, like maybe like a box of puppies is left on the doorstep or something like that, and it's like, oh, what is this this dad and his daughter going to do with these puppies that are just kind of roaming around causing trouble, chewing things and all of that stuff, and then they, like you said, like they kind of get it together and save the house from robbers, in a way that almost could have been a more fun concept, and we still would have had the great voice work from all the voice work actors that we had in this, that they could have done that and still had it work.
Yeah, I mean, you have Danny Trejo, we have Rob Schneider, Malcolm McDowell. It's like a who's who list, but it's funny, they didn't even try to lip sync the dogs. It's like a who's talking kind of deal, where the dialogue is just poorly dubbed in every time they cut to a dog, and sometimes it doesn't even fit. Sometimes they have to like cut to some random house or tree to get all that their dialogue in. And it felt really desperate and shoehorned and poorly kind of cobbled together.
Yeah. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting conversation, but maybe I'll do a quick synopsis and
Yeah,
I'll see if I
let
hit
everybody
this.
know what we're getting into here.
Right, exactly. So the basic premise is we have an actor, Tyler Hollinger. He plays an inventor who we're given like this sort of like, it's not even a cartoon, right? It's like drawings of cartoons that aren't in motion that I guess is
Like a
supposed to give us
pop-up
this. Yeah, it's like a pop, right? It's supposed to be like giving us the backstory. And this is sort of a way that the film, which kind of blows my mind. This film was an hour and 45 minutes long, and they still had to use these like this device to move the plot along. Like imagining them not using that part of it and giving it. I mean, it would have been like over 2 hours if they hadn't used these cartoons. But we're told through the cartoons that this character Robert, he was married, had a daughter, wife passed away, but he and the wife were like inventing things together, and he's never quite gotten over the death of the wife. And then as an inventor, he gets a job with Eric Roberts has a company, which I guess is it a pet electronics company? Is that what they were doing?
It was like a pet invention. It was almost like a Silicon Valley for pet inventions or something.
Exactly. Yeah, and in true Silicon Valley fashion, he's flown out to California where he lives in a sort of a housing development that all of the other people in the company work or live in. Among the people living there, we've got Dolph, who plays Victor, who's across the street, who, like you said, he's like a Richard Kind kind of character who's really obnoxious, has a really rough, grating personality. And he wants to move up in the company, but Eric Roberts, I think, because of his personality and his inability to do inventions, actually demotes him. And so he's always trying to go behind people's back to sort of either steal their inventions or sabotage their inventions so he can sort of move ahead. And then we have Holly, who's played by Sarah Lindsay, who is this beautiful blonde woman who walks her dog in cocktail dresses in the neighborhood and automatically has a thing for Robert, despite not knowing who he is or anything like that. And so that those are our characters. And of course, the daughter's played by Isadora Swan. And so the daughter is trying to push the dad to sort of get over the loss of the mother, and also to sort of she's upset about the fact that they're moving to this new area, but she's trying to make the best of it. And essentially what happens is that they go on a company retreat to Big Bear, sort of at the daughter's insistence that they should make this trip. And of course, Dolph also insists that they go. And we find out Dolph insists that they go because two bumbling crooks, which these movies always have bumbling crooks. We have Nicholas Totoro, who plays one of them. And then I don't even know who the other one was. I guess Stelio Savante was maybe the actor, but he's the less bright of the bumbling crooks, Stelio Savante. But Dolph hires them to break into Robert's house to steal his invention, which the invention is a dog collar that translates dog speech, which I don't even know how that works. I guess if the dog growls or something. I mean, I don't even know if the dog thinks they think sound waves or something. But that's the invention, and so the idea is that they're trying to steal this invention. At the same time, we have the dog. They have a dog in their family. The dog's name is Charlie, and it is voiced by Jerry O'Connell. And when they move into the neighborhood, Dolph also has a dog, a bulldog that's voiced by Danny Trejo, who's kind of like known as the dog father. He's the area like bully amongst the other dogs. We also have Gidget, who's voiced by Jennifer Love Hewitt, who is Holly's dog. And then Rob Schneider, who he does a Chihuahua's voice, but I think he does a lot of other voices as well. I think he kind of voices all the other dogs beyond that. But these neighborhood dogs are kind of giving Charlie a hard time at the same time. And he's sort of having to fight back against these neighborhood dogs while Nicholas Totoro is coming to break into the house. And kind of as everything goes together, Nicholas Totoro and the other guy decide that why are we breaking into this one house when we can break into all the houses in the neighborhood because everybody's in Big Bear. And that's when they're able to get all the dogs to rally together and fight off these baddies. And then the whole thing kind of just devolves into craziness at the end with like home invasion, people being tied up, and in kind of a goofy way, right? This is all done goofily, but yeah, it's just kind of all over the place at that point. But yeah, I think as we, I think it's enough of of a synopsis, but I think you kind of hit the nail on the head here with this, Mitch, because I think I was the same for me. That this was not a one sitting movie. This was something that took a few sittings to get through.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing you go over the plot, it's just like, man, that's like, it almost felt like it was two movies. It felt like there should have been the first movie where they get the dog, and then, he's dealing with, the loss of his wife and, moving. And then the next movie would have been the Home Alone thing. Like, they could have called the first one Inventing Christmas, because he's inventing all this stuff or something. And then the second one would have been Pups Alone. And I think that's where the pop-up book kind of scene fillers kind of came into play. It almost felt like you were watching like a pilot episode of something and then the very next episode, because it like you said, they just all up and go to Big Bear, and it felt like a very kind of like abrupt, kind of convenient thing just to get everybody out of the house. And it just really didn't flow. I mean, I watched it with my daughter, actually, and when she was younger, she liked the Buddies movies, the Air Buddy movies, and I told her about the movie, and she was like, "Oh my God, like that sounds like one of those old movies." And even she was like, "Man, this is pretty bad."
Right. Yeah, and I had planned on maybe watching it with my wife, and we didn't end up making it happen. I just had to kind of get it in the can as soon as possible, because she likes these bad Christmas movies, and we watch them together. Sometimes we watched one recently that was nine kittens at Christmas or something like that, and it had Brandon Routh of all people in it, former Superman, which was kind of funny to watch Brandon Routh in amongst like all these other actors who weren't at the Brandon Routh level. I think Gregory Harrison was the only other actor in it. But anyway, but even that movie, like watching that movie, like she and I were picking it apart, but it wasn't like as difficult a sit as this was. Like we were able to watch that in 90 minutes and enjoy it for 90 minutes. Whereas this is like, you get started in it and you're like, boy, this feels like a lot has happened in the first half hour. And then you look at the slider and realize I'm only 15 minutes in.
Yeah, I mean, it was like that the whole way. And I watched it on Roku, yeah, and they would have the commercials kind of awkwardly randomly cut in. Yeah. And I happened to look, it says 146 minutes. I'm like, well, they have to be counting the commercials, because every 10 minutes there's a 2-minute commercial break. And then about 30 minutes into it, I was like, oh no, they're not counting the commercial time. This is actually this is like Gone with the Wind length for talking dog movies. Yes. And like I said, like we forgot to mention Keith David is the wise bartender, who kind of imparts like the last minute holiday wisdom to our hero. And it was just kind of odd too, that like who was the live action people and who were just kind of like probably recorded their dialogue on their cell phone on the way to the, it's not to the level of like a talking cat bad, but right. At least a talking cat is so bad that it has this like weird mystique about it. And this was just kind of punishingly grueling just to get through the simplest scenes.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when Talking Cat is a really good comp in the sense that like Talking Cat also has a really great cast, right? You've got McLean Stevenson, Harry Morgan. I can't remember the actor's name who played the son on Mama's Family, but you had names in that movie as well, and it was kind of fun to watch them interact with this cat that was, it was a goofy concept. But here it was like, I think part of it was the jokes were just everywhere. But also I felt like people were talking over each other at points. Like there's a point where Dolph's on the phone with Nicholas Turturro and they're just talking over each other. Like they're not even like the whole thing just had this sort of helter-skelter feel to it that didn't help. Like you said, when you're talking about a talking dog movie, it needs to be kind of straight to the point. And when it's all over the place, it makes it even worse.
Yeah, and like I said, it just seemed like there was an abundance of dialogue, and even like it felt like they were cramming a lot of the dialogue in, and they would have to cut to random things just to set up plot points that really didn't need to be set up. But and a lot of it was just kind of I mean, I can't. First of all, I can't believe anybody over the age of 6 would willingly watch this the way that we watched it.
Right.
But like it didn't even function on just like a basic filmmaking level of point shoot, just get all the information, like master shots. A lot of it was like cut up very strangely, like they didn't have enough coverage, or they were using all the coverage they had just to pad out the scene. Like there's the one scene where the little girl comes and tells her dad, like, you need to get over it. You need, mom's dead, you need to move on. And they show like I think 6 or 7 different reaction shots. Like one time, like he puts his hand to his chin, and then the other time he adjusts his glasses, and then sometimes he like leans back, and it's like it seems like he's reacting to it's like 7 reaction shots when only one really needed to be done.
Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned about the editing piece because on Sean Malloy's I Must Break This podcast, he actually had, I think he had director Alex Merkin on because they mentioned the fact that Alex Merkin, he's kind of known for one thing he's known for, which I don't know if it's known for is the right term, but he directed the film, the Brittany Murphy film that was released right before she passed away. I think it's called Across the Hall, and I think it was like released in '09, and then 2 weeks later she passed away. So that's kind of like a sort of like a macabre thing that he kind of was sort of known. They kind of discussed that piece of it, and then they get into the movie. And one of the things he kind of talked about as a positive that I don't know is necessarily a positive is that this thing was filmed over a long period of time in July, or sorry, in 2017, but kind of over a period of years. Actors were brought back in to do scenes, and I wonder if there isn't some sort of advantage to the David Dakota, Fred Olen Ray, like we've rented out a mansion and we're going to do this thing in 3 or 4 days and get it out there, that like sometimes like trying to go too much for all of that kind of stuff with a movie like this, that maybe that's where you need a Dakota to come in and just get it done quick and dirty. For us as a movie watcher, sometimes maybe that's a better bet.
Yeah, I mean, now that you said that, it definitely makes sense because a lot of it feels very piecemeal together, and even the dad character, he looks like he kind of his hair changes a lot. It like so now that you said that, like it really makes sense because it just seems just kind of like hacked to pieces and then reassembled, and they probably realized, oh well, we don't have this and that, so they put in the pop-up book thing to lead you to one scene, because it was kind of funny because they pretty much dropped the pop-up book device about halfway through, once it finally, I won't say find its footing, but once it kind of just like drops all the subplots and becomes what you came to see, which is a pup version of Home Alone in the last half hour or so.
Yeah, yeah. Now, one area that I wanted to touch on that was, I don't want to say it was I guess a bright spot or an interesting spot of the film is that we got a fair amount of Dolph in this, which I was not expecting. I don't know what you thought going in, if it was going to be like a short Dolph role or if we were going to get as much as we got.
Yeah, like I said, it was interesting seeing who was on screen and who was just kind of like a voice actor. And I did not expect Dolph. I kind of had the feeling he'd be the villain character, but he's in nearly every scene, at least 70% of the movie. And the one good scene, I won't say it's good, but the most kind of like where you see a little bit of what it could have been is the dinner party scene where he's really kissing up to Eric Roberts, and he's just really kind of milking it to the hilt, and Eric Roberts is just basically kind of dismissive, and there's a chemistry there that nobody else in the film has. It seems like everybody, whenever they're doing their scenes, they're just kind of like reciting the dialogue and just trying to get it all out, and but there's actually kind of like a repartee between him and Roberts, especially when he's kind of thinking he's going to have the promotion, and Robert shoots him down. And I think my favorite part of the whole movie, one that I actually laughed, was there's just like a random dialogue scene with Eric Roberts, and then he just looks at the camera and says, "Let's get drunk." And I couldn't tell if that was a line of dialogue or that was his coping mechanism to finish filming the movie.
Right. Well, because yeah, it's great because that comes like almost immediately after he breaks the news to Dolph that he's because what he says, he's going to step down as CEO and he wants somebody else to take his place. And of course the funny thing is that he wants this guy Robert to take his place, who again just started with the company. And nobody really, it's like this idea that everybody seems to know him, and we don't really understand why they think all these great things about him. But yeah, Eric Roberts is just like, yeah, let's get drunk. And of course, in true Eric Roberts fashion, right, he's only in essentially like this one set in this lodge in Big Bear. He's like, I think in one room or another. But yeah, I mean, there's and then even then it's like, oh, let's do. He wants to do like some kind of game night thing where people are like playing like board games and ping pong and stuff like that, and it's like a montage of music and Dolph's character like chest bumping people and being overly competitive and obnoxious. And it's like, on the one hand, it's fun to see Dolph doing that kind of thing, but on the other hand, it's like, did we need any of that in the movie? Like, did it further anybody's character arc at all? Was it, did it do anything that we did? If that scene wasn't in the movie, would we have said, man, I don't know if I really got Dolph's motivation in this or something like that?
Well, they even spell it out on this T-shirt. He's wearing a T-shirt that says "sore loser," right. And even my daughter looked at me and she's like, "Was that really necessary?" I said, "Was it necessary for him to put the eye paint under his eye for Connect Four?" Right. I mean, like you said, like some other, if this was a movie just about like kind of corporate drama, like CEO, or something, like maybe that would have been funny. But in a talking dog movie that's already kind of lacking in the talking dog department, that scene needs to get cut.
Right. Again, you're at an hour and 46 minutes, and again, I think people sometimes get a kick out of me, or not, maybe not even get a kick out of it. They maybe think it's old that I just am constantly banging this drum about run times. But I mean, this was a movie that the hour and 47 felt like you said, it felt like Gone with the Wind territory. And, or at the very least, like The Irishman. I mean, The Irishman's the last movie that I did in multiple settings, that wasn't like a situation where like I maybe started a movie late at night and fell asleep, So, it already was long. And then it's like, I mean, I don't know how many scenes were like this that either felt like they shouldn't have been in the movie or again, just went on too long. Like, Dolph helps them move in. And he's just you're like, he's still there at their house. It's like he hasn't left yet. And he's like comes in from another room and starts talking again about this or that stuff. And it's like, it was great seeing Dolph on screen so much, but then it's also like, why is this scene happening for so long?
Yeah, and I can't really fault Dolph for this because I mean he rarely has an opportunity like this to kind of play this goofy, like grating character. And he takes full advantage of it, but like at the same time, like that there's got to be a middle ground here where you get like maybe just one scene where he tries to sneak a peek at the inventor's new invention instead of like 3 or 4 like in the same conversation. And it's like, okay, we get the idea. He's a sneaky, meddling villain, but at the same time, let's get to the talking dogs.
Right, exactly. Because that's the other piece of it too, is that with the talking dog situation, it was such an awkward construct with this whole like bullying piece of it, where like one of the first things that happens is when everybody goes to Big Bear, Danny Trejo's bulldog dog sends the other dogs in to trash the house of Charlie, and that just seemed like, I don't know, it seemed like very obnoxious to see that. And then of course, I guess the woman who was like, because that's the other thing, they have this woman who's there who's like, I guess, walking all of the dogs in the neighborhood for everybody while they're in Big Bear. And I guess she cleans the house or the dog cleans the house. I don't know who cleans the house after, but after it gets destroyed, it's suddenly cleaned again. So there's a lot of things like that happen in this movie that you're like, one, why did this need to happen? But two, like it seems to have no impact on the rest of the film.
And then there's the running joke between the two mailmen that always get attacked by Charlie. And it's like one of these scenes would have been funny, but there's like three of them, and it's like I said, like it felt like it was like two episodes of a TV show that didn't get picked up because there's these like subplots that are like eat up like 10, 15, 20 minutes at a time, but they go nowhere. And you could see that like these bumbling mailmen characters being kind of set up for like a recurring role on a series or something, but they really have no impact on the plot except delivering packages and then getting like there's not even like the scene where they get bit on the ass or anything. It's just it's so tepid. They just kind of run away scared with a couple of scratch marks. It's
Yeah, what you mentioned that about the reoccurring thing, because one idea that I kind of had about this movie in terms of like why certain people were involved with it is at the same time you had like that whole, I don't know if you know that Dog That Saves Christmas series that had I think it was voiced the dog was voiced by Mario Lopez in one part and then Joey Lawrence in another, but it was like one of those deals where like the movie came out, it had is it Gary Valentine. He's Kevin. Oh no, I'm having trouble now. Kevin James's brother. So he's like a poor man's Kevin James. Gary Valentine, and then it had like for the villains, it had Dean Cain and this guy who was like a poor man's Big Pussy. I think his name's like Joey Diaz, but it ended up being like the biggest rated TV movie of the year when it came out. I think it was like 2009 when it came out, and it spawned like 5 or 6 sequels. And each sequel is like more mailed in than the first one. And so my wife and I found out about the series because we watched one called The Dog Who Saved Halloween. It had like Lance Hendrickson. It was essentially a ripoff of The Burbs, where Lance Hendrickson is living next door and he creates a haunted house, but everybody thinks he's murdering people in his house. And so Gary Valentine is, of course, doing the Tom Hanks thing where he's trying to sneak in and find out what's going on. And then we found out that Dean Cain and Joey Diaz are these bumbling burglars who have kind of made it through each movie, and he hires them to go in and help him break in to find out what's going on. And then we discovered it was a whole series. And I guess that's kind of a roundabout way of me saying, I wonder if the people involved with this movie thought same thing, that this could take off and be a series, especially when they were shooting it in 2017, where the Dog Who Saved whatever movies were, I think they were just kind of hitting their end, but they had been made for enough time that yeah, maybe everybody involved thought, hey, this could be like 3 or 4 movies that we could be signing on for.
Yeah, I mean, the title alone just kind of like, there are worse Christmas movie titles out there. And it tells you everything that you need to know about the movie. Like you said, there was like the 9 Cats at Christmas. It's like they couldn't afford 3 more cats to make it 12 Cats at Christmas. Right. But you know what I mean? So it's like okay, the title was there, the idea was there, but the execution is just a mess.
Yeah, and I think probably the first place, at least that I could see where the execution is bad, is in the humor. It felt like every joke. I don't know, like you said, I think the only one that really landed was the Eric Roberts "Let's Get Drunk." Like I don't know if any of them. I mean, seeing Dolph in some funny outfits was great. Seeing him dressed up like Santa was funny. But in terms of the actual jokes themselves, whether you were an adult or you're a kid, I don't know that they would work for either demographic.
Yeah, and I mean, like the conceit of having everybody be an inventor. Well, that kind of was like a necessity. Yeah. Because how else are the dogs going to rig up these like Rube Goldberg booby traps, right? So the inventions are already there, right, in the houses. So like they would just convert like the taco maker into like a laser shooter or something, but in some of it, it's just like scene for scene Home Alone, like the bowling ball, right, and stuff falling, off, down the stairs and like. I mean, the movie is so cheap. At one point, when the dogs knock the marbles across the floor for Nicholas Turturro to fall on, it's only like 6 marbles. Mm-hmm. He has to like he tries to sell it, and it's like, oh yeah, no, that he just fell because like he was probably like, there's no way I'm really falling on all these marbles. But when you look at the scene, like, it's just like 6 marbles, and he just kind of awkwardly falls to the ground. It's like, yeah, that's not a very good slapstick performance.
No, and then of course, like you get the scene where the two of them, when they first, for whatever reason, I don't understand why they even did this. Maybe I missed a line of dialogue that explained why they were doing this, but when they're first getting ready to break into the houses towards the end of the movie, for some reason, the bumbling one sticks his head through the dog door, and this old beagle just farts on him, and they did this huge joke about how horrible it smells that the dog's farting on him, and oh my god, I can't handle it. And then Nicholas Turturro does the exact same thing, puts his head in there, and he's kind of making these faces with his head sticking through a dog door about how disgusting it is that this dog's farting on him. And there's got to be a part of me that's wondering, like, while he's acting that scene, is he in his head, like, figuring out how, the conversation about where he fires his agent, as he's acting that out? Like, I mean, is it really the promise of being in a series? Is that what it is? Like, he's thinking like, okay, I'm going to sit through this because this is going to get me 3 pictures, 3 paydays that I could use.
And another kind of odd kind of thing about the movie is the relationship between Nicholas Turturro and the other guy. It's like of mice and men kind of thing happening, where he is obviously mentally impaired, right, and he's just being kind of pushed around and like kind of used by him. And it's like, is that trope still kind of like viable and like kind of like this time, and this day and age, having kind of like a mentally impaired kind of, not even a gentle giant, but like that kind of character, and just kind of making them prone to being mercilessly like an object of violence and stuff, having bowling balls smashed on their skulls. It was a very kind of like, I was like, gosh, I can't even, and I was trying to think, I was like, when have I seen that, that Lenny type character in a movie? And I was like, I have not seen that. It's probably the Gary Sinise, John Malkovich one, right, like 30 years ago. I'm like, there's probably a reason why we don't use this trope anymore.
Right, because I think in that Dog Who Saved Christmas series, the Joey Diaz character is partially that, but he's not quite at the level that this guy was. Like, again, this guy is delivered in such a clunky, like poorly, I don't know, like heavy-handed way that, like, you're right, like it's a throwback to kind of like an 80s kind of sensibility that, like, nowadays you wouldn't. You're right, it doesn't work. Like, you've got to do it in a little bit better way, where either the character has a little bit more agency or a little bit more going for them. And yeah, it was like they were trying to do the whole, oh, would you stop kind of thing because the guy's doing something goofy, but they could never quite, like you said, it was more like, like he should be helping this guy as opposed to like getting angry with him all the time.
Yeah, and it was. It was just weird because, like, like I said, there's a bare bones idea for what could have been just a perfectly acceptable kids' Christmas movie, but like you said, like the things like sticking their head in the doggy door, or there's a really long scene where they're like, "Where's that sound coming from?" And they look directly into a water pipe, and there's like this 10-minute, like, not 10-minute, but like it's like 30 seconds until finally the water comes crashing down on them. Or like when they put the cherry bomb in the toilet and they keep looking and looking and looking, and then finally the water explodes in their face. And I'm like, at least, in the Home Alone movies and the Home Alone ripoffs, there's some sense of set up, payoff, and not just kind of like fumbling around waiting for something to blow up in your face.
Yeah, because that's a good point, right? That when in movie time, right, like these digressions felt like 10 to 15 minutes of movie time, when one, what's going to happen. And I mean, like the water one is a really great example, because so you get Malcolm McDowell's character who turns on some water faucet somewhere, which we don't even know where it's connected to this other faucet that's outside. And we don't even know why this faucet's outside and why it's aimed like so like it would be aimed at two people standing in the doorway the way it was. But then it's like when the water goes through, it's like the two, our two bumbling thieves, instead of just like getting out of the way and being like, oh man, I'm soaked, they're like screaming and yelling and acting like they're like in like, it's like being doused in acid or something like that when it's just water. So that kind of made no sense. And then, like you said, the cherry bomb thing, that cherry bomb is floating in the toilet for like an immeasurable amount of time. First with the bumbling character, and then when Nicholas Turturro comes in, it's like feels like another 5 to 10 minutes of them watching this thing, and it's like we know it's going to explode. We know that toilet water is going to go flying up in the air and hit people in the face. Let's just get to it. Let's just do it. But they couldn't, for whatever reason, they couldn't just do it.
And I don't know too if going back to like the whole kind of selling it for television angle, if that 146-minute running time, if that's the exact running time you need to put in commercials for a 2-hour time slot. It's like did they have to kind of pad this thing out in order to sell it to Hallmark or Freeform or whoever? It seemed like it was out of necessity. I would think it was out of necessity, because why would you make a 106-minute talking dog movie? It's just, I mean, that's the only thing I can come up with.
No, because actually it's 90 minutes is actually the number, because for an hour of TV time now, it's like 43 minutes is what you need for an hour. That's how much we have commercials in these shows now. And so actually, like 90 minutes is good, because 86 for the movie, right? And then the credits go flying through while they're showing footage of the next movie.
The next one,
right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So actually, this is long for TV too. Like if they were going to put this on TV, they would have had to cut it. They would have had to probably chop off a good 20 minutes or so to get it there. So this was definitely not even with TV in mind. I guess it was meant strictly for the streaming thing. But the thing with the streaming thing, right, is that the Roku channel is the only one, I think, that has it available to stream for free. The rest of them are paid. And I think anybody that paid for this, I mean, I'm always one of those people that likes to support indie stuff. And when I heard Alex Merkin on the I Must Break This podcast last year talking about the film, I was like, yeah, putting in some money and supporting indie is a good idea. But after having seen this, I don't know how I would have felt, especially if I'd paid the $6 new release fee for this. Yeah, I mean, I love Dolph movies, but being a Dolph completist, I don't know if it's worth that much.
Yeah, I mean, that, like I say, if you're under 6, like I can see watching a talking dog Christmas movie. For guys like you and me that have to watch every Dolph, Eric Roberts, Danny Trejo movie, this is like the kind where you just kind of lean in and you take the high fastball to the head and pray that you're able to play tomorrow's game. But I mean, I don't know if I could say this was the worst movie of theirs, but it's definitely in the top 2 or 3. I think for Dolph, I think like the Final Inquiry might be the toughest sit that for me, but like that's the only one I could think of. But like I said, like it was nice seeing him in just an atypical role. Yeah. But I mean, honestly, that was about as nice as I can get on this one.
Yeah, because it's the novelty of Dolph, like you said, playing the Richard Kind character, which what I liked about the way he played it was he took advantage of the fact that he is a big guy to play it as like the kind of like high school. I don't think high school bully character is the right one. It's kind of like the high school, like the 80s sort of high school, like big brother
like
character.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, like the jock big brother character. Like if you had like John Cusack in a movie, and then his brother is played by, I'm trying to think of an actor at that time who would have been like, like a few years older and bigger. Like, I mean, maybe Sam Jones, right? Maybe Sam Jones looked young enough in the early 80s that he could, but that kind of guy, right? Who's just like putting him in headlocks and giving him noogies and that kind of thing. I like that Dolph added that element to his character, where he was just like kind of slapping that Robert character on the back a lot, putting his arm around him in a really rough way, all that kind of stuff. It was a fun element to the Richard Kind character. And then also the fact that we see him in a Santa suit, we see him in like one-piece Christmas pajamas, we see him in an ugly Christmas sweater, and even like when he's in the ugly. Oh, go ahead.
He had his hair in rollers because I think they were trying to explain why his hair was wavy in the next scene or something.
Right, exactly. And it's funny because Dolph's presence is such that even when you're putting him in those kinds of environments, there's still a sense that he's Dolph. That like, even when he's wearing like like he takes the ugly Christmas sweater and he makes it kind of cool, like almost like, yeah, I'd like to get that sweater and wear that sweater, which I thought what made that part of it fun. It's just like it's packaged in this movie. It's wrapped up in this movie that it's almost like, yeah, as a Dolph completist, is it worth it to go through all that just to witness those moments?
And then there's the really strange scene at the end where I don't want to spoil it for everybody. I'm pretty sure you could guess that Dolph gets his comeuppance at the end. Yeah. But when he's chasing after our hero dog, Charlie, and one of the traps that the dogs have set is like kind of like this. They don't even. I don't think they even set it up earlier in the movie. But there's like a dog car wash where the dogs go through this tube and it washes and dries them. And so he's chasing after the dog, and the dog goes through the car wash, which is just like this tube in somebody's yard. All Dolph had to do is run around the tube and catch him on the other side. But no, Dolph like crawls through this tube that he can barely fit in, and of course he gets soaked with water, and then he gets caught in the tube. And I'm just like you said, it was like one of those was this the scene where they like immediately got on the phone with their agent kind of scene? And it's like, I know it's a kids movie, but at the same time it was like, why is he crawling through this tube?
Yeah. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, because with it being a kids movie, I kind of wanted to get like a different take on it, just to kind of see. Because I know obviously in your case you watched it with your daughter, which was good too. So I was looking at the external reviews, and this a website, Parent Previews, reviewed it. A woman named Savannah Lee did the review, and her tag for it was "Nothing can save this dog of a film." But when we get to the actual kid part, because she mentioned she had a 5-year-old, she said, "My 5-year-old spent the whole runtime jumping on the couch, leaving the room to find toys to play with, and just generally being uninterested. For a film to not even be able to hold his attention is a feat unto itself." So that tells you that, like, we're looking at it as adults saying like, oh, this isn't working for us. But then we're saying, okay, maybe 5 or 6 years old, that might do the trick. But this woman's saying, my 5-year-old couldn't handle it. Yeah, she said she kind of went a little bit more in than we did on it. Like we're kind of giving this movie the business, but she went in much more, saying she's going to talk to her lawyer to demand compensation for her emotional distress from watching the film.
Well, and one thing, when you look at some of the good talking dog movies like Homeward Bound or Incredible Journey, the human element is usually secondary.
Yeah,
and the picture, the way they capture the dogs and the animals on film, it's almost like a dog food commercial. It's very kind of like every scene, like the dogs are kind of like primed, and they look like they've had a lot of time spent on their hair and grooming and everything. And then, like, when you see like Robert Hayes and some of the, he comes in and is like, oh, what's going on here? It's kind of like an afterthought. And like, I mean, I'm a dog lover, but the dogs that were in this film were not very photogenic. They can't help that. But they didn't even take the time and care to kind of present the dogs as kind of like it. In a fashion for like a 4 or 5-year-old to be like, oh, look, cute dogs. The movie even fails on that level.
Yeah, because it should be right. You when a kid is watching a movie, like 'cause even as an adult, like Charlie, I liked Charlie as a dog. Even like you said, he was even he was a little bit haggard. But I always got a kick out of him, like when he'd be looking out the window and he'd have his paws on the windowsill, standing on his hind legs. That kind of thing is always kind of just always going to tug at the heartstrings for me when it comes to a dog. Doing that kind of stuff. But you're right, like. For kids watching a movie with dogs, right? Their mindset should be like, oh, I want these dogs. I want like all of these animals to live with us. And I don't think these are the kind of dogs that people are going to look at. It's more like it's not like like if these dogs were being walked on the street, kids aren't going to run up and be like, oh, I want to pet the dog and all of that stuff. And you're right. Like for a movie in real life, every dog deserves a home. Every dog should be loved, and whether they're photogenic or not, that shouldn't matter. But in a movie, they should be made presentable. You're right about that. And it's almost like I don't know if they wanted an idea of them being a ragtag group, but even that just didn't come through enough.
Well, I mean, when you look at Rin Tin Tin and Petey from the Little Rascals, they're always kind of like these down and out street dogs or whatever, but they're always like they looked like they belonged in a movie. Like they had like a little bit of dust or something on them, but yes, they all they would have to do is wash them in the next scene. They looked like something from the Westminster Dog Show. So it like. And they didn't really even do like tricks or anything. They weren't like, at least like in like the Air Bud movies or even like they can at least perform like tricks. And I think the only thing that they could really do was kind of put their paw on their nose to be like, oh, like I did, I made a poo-poo or something. Right. There was they just kind of sit there. They kind of looked lethargic. They didn't like really kind of like, like even like going into like something as bad as like the film Show Dogs, those dogs. I mean, as reprehensible as a lot of that was, like the dogs looked like dogs, like a dog you would see in a movie, and this just looked like a almost like a shot on video kind of cast of dogs. Like it was very. They spent all their money on Dolph and Keith David and Eric Roberts, and like these were the dogs that they could afford.
Yeah, and I do wonder, like, so I'm trying to think where. So this was shot in Los Angeles, which, I mean, LA. Maybe that's part of the problem, right? Is that if you're shot in Los Angeles, a good dog groomer in LA can charge a lot of money, and so they couldn't afford. Maybe if they had shot this in outside of the LA area, maybe they shot it in Vegas. I don't know, like where if they shot it in Georgia, where things are cheaper, or Michigan. Maybe that was part of it, is getting a good dog groomer. But again, going back to that Dog Who Saved Christmas series of films, they have a nice like golden Labrador dog that's in there, and it's kind of that way that like. Even in the scene where there's in the very first scene of that movie, Gary Valentine picks up the dog at this, essentially it's like a prison that's supposed to be a kennel, and it's a really kind of dark and dour thing that I thought for kids it was a little bit too much. But even there, the dogs are supposed to look ragtag. I mean, even the main character dog, they kind of make a joke that he's like living on the streets, and then he turns himself into the kennel so he can get his 3 square meals, and then he gets adopted. Whereas, like, yeah, with this dog, I mean, I think that that Charlie was a border collie, which those dogs are just naturally really cute. So it shouldn't take much to have a border collie look great on screen. But yeah, they managed to find a way to do it.
And I think too there are firms in Hollywood and stuff that's all they do is provide trained dogs for shows and films and everything. And I don't know if they didn't want to pay those exorbitant prices to get the actual trained dogs or what. It just seemed like just one of the many areas where this movie was lacking, and just kind of like a fundamental basic movie about dogs. Like that would be the first box you would check before maybe getting a Dolph Lundgren or something. Of course we wouldn't have watched it other than that, but like when I was watching, I'm like, God, like there's at least like the scene where like they would either kind of jump up and pull a string or something to activate the the invention that trapped the criminal. But usually it's just like them putting a paw on a button that's already on the floor. So it's not even like they're performing this great feat of like, oh, you don't even get the sense that the dogs are really saving Christmas or whatever. They're just kind of like, oh, well, we've got these inventions. You know, if it wasn't for the inventions, they would have never stood a chance.
Right, because there's this sense that they set this whole thing up, but we don't. That's the other part of the film, right? Is that I think setting the whole thing up would have taken too much. But that was kind of one of the things about Home Alone, right? Is that we get this quick. I mean, it wasn't a long montage in Home Alone where Kevin is setting up all the booby traps for the crooks, and you know it wouldn't have taken. It was almost like one of those things where like. And also too, this reason why they got all the dogs together was that they were breaking into every house. Well, how did they know they were going to break into the one house first? Like you know, like how did it just work out that was the house that they were going to go to, and that's where they needed to set everything up? So yeah, it was. I was expecting a bigger. I think, like you said, we were expecting a bigger payoff from what the dogs were going to do, when really all they were doing was just using inventions that this inventor guy had already created.
Right. And like in the montage where they're kind of setting everything up, like most of the time is devoted to the one old dog eating chili so he can fart on them when they enter the doggy door. And so it's like and then there's like the long scene where the mentally challenged robber gets on this like slowly turning pedestal, and he manages to shrink wrap himself. And at some point in these movies, like, yes, okay, like I buy the fact that he's gonna run up the stairs, get hit by a bowling ball, and then the other guy's gonna run up the stairs and get hit by another bowling ball. Right. But at some point you would notice that oh my God, I'm being shrink wrapped, and I would step off of the pedestal. But he just continues to stand there until the saran wrap is completely covered him. And I'm like, and at some point I started thinking about Death Wish 5 when like the same scene happened. I'm like, God, if any movie needed like Charles Bronson here.
Right. Well, because the other thing, right, is he gets wrapped up in the saran wrap like that, but then it has absolutely no bearing on the next scene or two, right? Because not long after that, he's in the bathroom with the cherry bomb, which they don't even explain why he put the cherry bomb in the toilet. I don't even remember. He just throws a cherry bomb in there, but it's almost like he's wrapped in saran wrap, and it's this big thing to only be there for like 5 minutes of movie and then move on to this other thing.
Yeah, and I mean at some point, like, yes, it was nice that Dolph was stepping outside his comfort zone, playing a different character. But would this movie have been better if he was kind of playing more of his typical character? Like if he was like the Green Beret dog catcher or something, the puppisher or something, he would have like it's something that would have at least kind of, I don't know, just kind of kicked it up a notch or something. But like, to me, like, like when the movie can't even, deliver on its bare bones promise of what it's claiming to deliver on, then it's just a tough sit all the way through.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed about this movie too that probably explained like the uneven jokes and all of that was that it looks like it's got 3 writers, which I always think of the what was it, the space mutiny joke on MST3K, pass from screenwriter to screenwriter in a desperate attempt to save it. And so again, you think of that, but when I looked at Altitude also had 3 different screenwriters. And Altitude is a movie, when we were talking about that one, where it's kind of more inspired. It's a very bare bones, it takes place in one set pretty much, but it was a kind of a really cool inspired concept where Dolph is sort of taking a back seat to Denise Richards and Greer Grammer, Kelsey Grammer's daughter, as these 2 sort of almost like leads for the film. And so you get an action movie that's got 2 female leads, and it was kind of a fun actioner that it was an hour, 20 minutes long, 28 minutes long, so it had no wasted time. And so it's also kind of fascinating to see that the same director can give us something like Altitude that's inspired, that's concise, that's quick, but also action packed with no real um, uh, lost time or no real wasted time. And then something like Pups Alone, where almost none of the jokes land. There is really nothing inspired about it, right? They didn't do anything cute or different with the genre at all. It's really just derivative in every way, shape, and form. And it's long and it's kind of drawn out and not well edited. It's fat, I mean, I guess it's one of those things, right? I mean, it's like Kevin Smith can give us Clerks and Jersey Girls, right? Like it just, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, well, I think Altitude, is one of those movies that's kind of like a more of a sum of its parts.
Yeah.
There's kind of like this kind of X factor that you don't really count on, that, whether it's Denise Richards kind of relishing the chance to have to be the female lead in an action movie, or if it's just kind of a subtle variation on the cliches that we've seen in airplane action movies. You get a little a spark here and there, and that can make the whole movie. And here it just seemed like it was just devoid of any kind of real momentum. There was no urgency to anything. There were setups and no payoffs. There were payoffs with no setups. And it was just kind of, like you said, maybe with having three writers, nobody was kind of communicating on like, okay, what the character should be doing, where they should be going, where they're going to end up. It was just kind of like a free for all.
Yeah, because it's it's you're just thinking about the way the movie ended, even where it's just like it's so kind of all over the place, and it wasn't even like joking, another MST3K joke of the like you got to put on eye protection because all the loose ends are flying together. This wasn't even like loose ends being tied together. It was like, and I'll kind of give people an idea of what happens at the end is Dolph and the main character Robert and his daughter and the woman that he's been sort of carousing with, Holly, they all show up at the house and find Nicholas Totoro and the other guy, the Lenny. Actually, I didn't even realize his name's Lenny. You're talking about
there we go.
yeah, right, the Mice and Men. His name's Lenny. They find them there, broken into the house, and then Dolph acts like he doesn't know them, and they keep bumbling around, so they keep calling him boss, they keep calling him by name and stuff like that. And so he punches them to knock them out so they won't keep complaining. And then the invention that's supposed to translate Dog's speech, it breaks, and then Dolph kind of plays with it a bit and somehow puts it together. And then there's this whole long drawn out thing where like the main character is excited that he's finally made this thing work, and Dolph has got this big contract that he wants him to sign, and then the daughter's like, no, don't sign this contract because you're giving him all the rights to everything. And then Dolph is like holding the dog at I guess not gunpoint, but like tranquilizer gunpoint, which I didn't understand that either. If it's just a tranquilizer gun, why were they so worried about him shooting the dog with it? But then so they sign, the guy signs and hates, and then these bad guys that we thought were not working with Dolph anymore because they weren't getting along. When Dolph chases the dog outside and goes through that whole cleaning contraption, the two baddies are tying up the father, the daughter, and the love interest in this sort of like comedic, like sort of screwball comedy bondage kind of thing that kind of made no sense either, because it's like, why are they helping Dolph here? They should just be getting out and running away. But yet, no, they're helping him and, tying them up or whatever. It was like all this stuff is happening where it's like, we could have just wrapped it up right there at the end, right? It could have just been Dolph is there. The two guys are there. They call the cops. The cops come and arrest them. End movie, good 15 minutes early. But they tacked on all this other stuff, and it was like, what is? And I was like, I even had trouble following. Like, why are they doing all this? Like, why are we investing all this time in all this stuff when we didn't need it?
And my daughter, she even picked up at the end where they tie everybody up, and at first the daughter character has duct tape on her mouth, and then they cut the Dolph running around, and then when they come back, she's sitting there talking to the guy. And my daughter's like, whoa, didn't she just have duct tape on her mouth? And I was like, I thought so. It was just like you said, if it was shot over a couple of months or years or whatever, that's kind of feels like a scene that would have been added in. Be like, oh, we need to bulk up the finale. Let's just do this scene, and with them not really remembering that. Oh yeah, like the other two guys should be probably hitting the road by now.
Right, right, because also too, like the dad, they like I pulled the tape off so we could talk and put it back on, but it always looked like it had been pulled off and put back on from the beginning. It never looked like, so that was that, right? It was like the whole continuity with the scene was a mess too. I was wondering with the daughter not having the tape, if like the scene that she was in without it was supposed to have happened before the scene where they're tying them up and they all have tape on their mouths, and they just messed it up or something. But then they never come back to it. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what was going on there. I don't know. It was just like, why is this even in here? The only thing I could think of between that scene and like maybe the Saran wrap or something like that is like, I always joked about when the first one of the first Van Damme films I did. I can't remember the movie, but it was one where he's like tied up and hanging upside down with no shirt on. And I was looking through the movie tags, and one of the tags was shirtless male bondage. And so I was wondering if like they're just throwing stuff like that in there, so you just get like, because I don't know, like if people tied up or or whatever, like those are like tags. None of those tags are in this at all, which I don't know. Like I don't know if like there's like reasons for having these things tacked into the movies to kill like IMDb tags or something, but it was so tacked on. And then like you said, there's the whole thing of Dolph chasing him through the thing, and I wondered that one I think was almost like directly for kids, right? This idea of him, he's not going to go chase the dog out around this contraption. He's going to go through it, which I mean, Dolph is a big guy, and the idea, and he's a big guy who's in his 60s, and the idea of making him go through that, I wonder if they had a stunt double or somebody go through and do that, because that seemed like a lot of work for him.
Yeah, I mean, and like another thing with the whole just kind of like, messy climax is when they're tying up the family. We see, I think it's a shot of somebody pulling their cell phone out and hitting the emergency call button,
right?
And that's how we're supposed to like know that the cops came. But later, like at the next to the last scene of the movie, it's when the inventor and his estranged father get back together. He's like, "Well, I'm the one who called the cops." It's like, no, wait, the inventor pulled his phone out while he was tied up, and like my daughter was like she was like, hold up, she's like hands up, and she's like, wait a second,
right? Yeah,
it was like, now what really happened? And that seemed like that really kind of cements the idea of like, there was nobody on the script level talking to one another here.
Yeah, and even that piece of it, because like I think it's the woman who does it, who does the call, and it's like she has her hands behind her, and she kind of slips her phone out from behind her while her hands so she can't even see what's going on. At first, we don't know if she could. Maybe she was able to look behind her and see what was happening, but I don't think I'd be able to get I've only had to do the emergency call button one time. It was I was getting my hair cut. I was waiting to get my hair cut, and there was a guy there who had a seizure suddenly, and turned out he was waiting with his mom. He had epilepsy, and so I was the one who did the 911 call, and then by the time we got somebody on the phone, the mom had sort of settled it down and sort of fixed it. So it's the only time I've ever had to use that call function, but I don't think I could be able to do it without looking. I don't think I'd be able to know right on my phone where it is.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, even there, like that was a climax. It was like 3 or 4 climaxes when one would have sufficed.
Right. Yeah, and the other thing too is at that point, see, that's the other thing too with these kinds of movies, is that with the slider bar, you know how much you've got left. And there's almost a sense of like, man, I've got this much left, and this feels like it should be over now, and I've still got another 15 minutes to go. What are they going to do with this other 15 minutes? Yeah, and again, I get like with Dolph like wanting to kind of go outside of himself and do something different. Like he was a trooper. I give him credit for that. He was a trooper, but we didn't necessarily need all the things that he was a trooper in.
Yeah, and it's like one of those things where, you and me, we watch Dolph movies, like, we live for Dolph movies. And then it's just like, I think, and and Eric Roberts is like this. Eric Roberts has made so many movies. Like, I'm sure he's probably already forgotten that he's made this movie.
Right.
And there will come a time where you and I have forgotten that we've watched this movie, but it's not going to be anytime soon.
No. Well, because that's the thing with Dolph, right? Because I think, yeah, I think between the two of us, I mean, because a lot of times when I'll go into some of Dolph's back catalog to get movies I haven't reviewed yet, when I look in the IMDb critic reviews, I'll see that Video Vacuum had covered that one. So I think we're both in that category of we probably reviewed as many. I know for me, I'm like close to as many movies as Dolph has years on the planet that I've reviewed. I think he just turned what did he just turn 66? I think. He was on 65, and I think I've got 64 of his movies reviewed on the site. So, yeah, so we've kind of done our work with Dolph, and there is a sense of like wanting to get as many of these Dolph movies in as possible. But yeah, this one, it's funny you mentioned Final Inquiry because when I first was on Sean Malloy's podcast to talk Dolph movies, he asked me, he was like, I'm having trouble finding somebody for Final Inquiry, and I'm like, hey, I'll talk any Dolph anytime, and I did Final Inquiry, and I almost feel like I had an easier time talking about Final Inquiry than this movie. I mean, in terms of a sit, it might have been just as bad, but I think it was like an easier one to discuss. I don't know how you feel.
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, they're both atypical roles for Dolph, and I think, I think in Final Inquiry, his presence alone was just kind of distracting. Because I was like a biblical story, and it's the Punisher. So it's like this, like you said, like he was like gratuitously cast against type, and so it's like you said with the Christmas sweaters and all, and then like when he's wearing like the the toga or whatever in Final Inquiry, you're like I don't know about this.
Right. I mean, the other thing that I liked about Final Inquiry is that we had two Swedish acting legends, right? We had Dolph Lundgren and we had Max von Sydow. So there was like one element there. We had which I don't know how many people consider Dolph to be a Swedish acting legend, but I know we do. But yeah, and there was a sense when I was watching it of like, okay, I'm watching. I think I was surprised by how much Dolph was in the movie. And I kept kind of leaning on that as a positive. And then just like a bad joke would come in or something would happen that I was like, why is this even in the movie? That would kind of make me sort of not feel as much fun about that part of it.
Right. And if you kind of like, as like another kind of comparison of how, this could have worked. I mean, if you look at Kindergarten Cop 2, which had Dolph in it, that is better than any Kindergarten Cop 2 really had to be or should have been, or it was kind of surprising. It's not great, but for a directed to DVD sequel to an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, it was not bad. It delivered what it promised, and there were parts of it that were actually kind of funny, and it kind of it knew. It knew its role. It stayed in its lane, and it delivered a little bit more than it had to. Where this one, it just stumbled out of the gate and just never really could make heads or tails about what it wanted to be.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point because Kindergarten Cop 2 might be a really great comp for this as well because one, it's also I just pulled it up on IMDb. It's also had 3 writers. So again, something that needed to be pieced together. It also was close in runtime. It was an hour and 40 minutes, so it was only 6 minutes shorter than the movie we're talking about here. But it wasn't a multiple sit movie, right? Like you could get through this one you could get through Kindergarten Cop 2 pretty easily. Like you said, for a direct-to-video sequel for Kindergarten Cop, it was better than it needed to be, right? Or it didn't have to be as good as it was. And it's not like it was like one of Dolph's best, but it also wasn't this movie where I'm just like, oh, like what is, like even right. This one, like the jokes in Kindergarten Cop 2, there weren't as many jokes that fell flat, I think. And they were kind of, they were treading on similar territory in the sense of they wanted to make fun of the school industry at that time. And some of the jokes were like, okay, let's make fun of the PC aspect of it, where it's like, okay, I've seen these jokes so many times before. But there's something about Dolph doing them that kind of worked in a way that Dolph doing jokes in this movie also worked, but the rest of the movie didn't.
Right. And there's a difference between delivering like an obvious joke or like but you still have to have the setup and the payoff and the punchline. And that takes like basic kind of filmmaking skill to deliver something that's kind of competent. And this one, even though it was from the director of Altitude, which was a movie we both enjoyed, it just didn't seem like that fundamental basic ability of telling a joke in movie form. It just wasn't there, and that's how you get scenes that go on too long, or scenes that end abruptly, or just scenes of just kind of chaos that just don't really translate into laughs.
Yeah, I mean, one scene that, when talking about that point, one scene that I wanted to mention that really kind of struck me as just odd, and I didn't know why it was in the movie, was the scene, the first scene where we get our bumbling crooks who are going door to door. I guess Nicholas Turturro is dressed like a priest, and they're going door to door acting like they're part of some charity for the blind. And they go into this blind elderly woman's house. And while Nicholas Turturro is talking to her, the bumbling thief, Lenny, is destroying the house and trying to steal everything. And it's almost like kind of like a Grinch that stole Christmas kind of thing, where he's just packing up everything in the house to steal it. But he's also breaking stuff. And she's like, what's going on there? What just broke? Oh, no, it's nothing. Don't worry about it. And it's like, what is funny about robbing a blind elderly woman? Like, I get that it was being played for laughs. I get that the movie, I wasn't supposed to be taking it that seriously. But I feel like there could have been goofier thefts that they could have done that weren't like robbing elderly blind women. I don't know how that scene felt for you.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the whole Lenny character. It seemed like a gag that was just out of its time, and like, something you would see like on a Looney Tunes cartoon from the 50s. And even then, it might have been just kind of, borderline, kind of like, okay, roll your eyes. But like you said, and I think there's a scene that in that scene he drops or falls down or makes a loud noise like 7 or 8 times, when just 1 or 2 would have, we get the idea she's blind, she can't see what he's doing, but they just went on forever.
Yeah, it felt like that thing, like if you ever had like somebody in school, or somebody like you meet who's not really funny, but like they tell a joke, and when it doesn't get the response that they want, they keep going with it, or maybe they tell a joke that maybe they think is funny and they just keep doing it. This movie had that vibe to it with the humor, and I think that's always a difficult thing when the jokes overstay their welcome. I guess that's another area where Kindergarten Cop did a better job of it, where Kindergarten Cop would make a joke about something like Kindergarten Cop 2, I mean, they make a joke about, sitting in the lotus position not being called sitting Indian style anymore, right? And it's just one quick joke where Dolph tells the kids to sit Indian style. Bill Bellamy's in his earpiece, trying to help him out, and says, no, we don't call it that anymore. You got to say, I think, what did they say? Cross applesauce or something like that?
Crisscross applesauce.
Crisscross applesauce. That's what it was. They said that's what you got to tell the kids. And so he does that and sits. That's it. That's the joke. Boom. That's it. Whereas I think if this movie was telling that same joke, it would be like probably like all kinds of stuff happening of like, sitting Indian style, kids saying, oh, you can't say that. Maybe, maybe you get like the old Native American from the commercial, right? With the trash on the highway, right? With the one single tear dropping out. Like, it would just be like all kinds of stuff thrown in, and you just be like, we get it, right? You can't say sitting Indian style anymore. Dolph's character doesn't understand that. He's a guy from another time, and they're trying to move him into the present. Yeah, this movie would have overdone that joke the way Kindergarten Cop just did it once, and boom, that's it. It's the joke, and it's done.
Yeah, and it like, the director, he did a really good job on Altitude, and maybe comedy is not his forte, or maybe they thought that, just him working with Dolph again would kind of maybe compensate for some of the script's you know lackluster comedic timing there. But to me, it's hard to say. Like the bar was so low for this. It's a dog related Home Alone ripoff. It seemed to me that it could have been cleared, and like we could have been out here and say, it's a cute movie, 2-star movie. I'd watch it if it was on Freeform or Hallmark. But like it just kind of became like I think Santa's Summer Home or Summer House was a lot kind of a smoother ride than this one. It just was just kind of like baffling how just bad it was.
Yeah, and Santa's Summer Home is a good comp too, right? Because in Santa's Summer Home we had that one scene that was sort of like the Santa or the holiday film equivalent to rock climbing, right? Where we get the croquet playing scene that just went on forever. But there was just that one scene, and it's definitely with someone like a David Dakota, they know how to they know what, like if you gave David Dakota Pups Alone, he would know exactly what was expected out of him for Pups Alone, and he would deliver exactly the movie you were describing. The 2-star, watch it on Freeform, have a fun time with it kind of thing. And I think that's the problem here. Is I think I think you said, like, the director here, he gave us more than we were expecting with Altitude, but I think he tried to give more than we were expecting with Pups Alone, and it didn't work.
Yeah, and comedy and horror, they're kind of like, you don't really need a strong story for it to work. You either the laughs are there, the scares are there, and you can overlook a few things, storytelling wise or filmmaking wise, like if it delivers on the basic promise. And I admit I'm not the target audience for this, but even like you said, the lady on the one review, like her 5-year-old son couldn't even focus on it. So when you can't even capture that demographic, I mean, what is the demographic? Is it zygotes? And are they gonna watch it? It's just like I said, I've been trying not to use bad to describe movies, but man, it was bad.
No, you're right. I think you're right. Like, we don't want to. It's like one of those things where, like, you look at the people who made. Maybe kind of going back to the Kevin Smith thing with Jersey Girls. I think he was interviewed about Jersey Girls, and he said, when he was putting Jersey Girls together, he thought he had, I don't want to say a masterpiece, but they thought they had something really good. They had an invested cast. They had a story that he thought was working. He said each time they were shooting scenes, everything looked like it was working. And then they get it up on screen and they watch it and realize, like, wow, no, this wasn't what we thought it was. And it was almost kind of like the anatomy of a bad movie, right? That, like, you go in with the best of intentions. There's almost like sort of like two versions of the bad movie, right? There's the going in with the best of intentions and having it not work out. And then there's the, sort of the Emmett Furla Productions sort of, assembly line Bruce Willis movie where it's just like, hey, we're just going to throw this thing together, and if it works, it does, and if it doesn't, hey, you streamed it anyway and you watched it, so that's not our problem. It feels like they went in with the best of intentions, but I wonder, like, I can't fathom, like, John Turturro, Nicholas Turturro, sorry, I'm getting confused with John Turturro. Nicholas Turturro is heads in a doggy door, grimacing and making faces because he's acting like he's getting farted on. Like, how did they watch that scene and say, man, we got ourselves a winner here? Like, this is really going to play well.
Well, I'm not going to say there's a good movie lurking in here, but I think I know when Phantom Menace came out, they made the the Phantom edits where they edited all the Jar Jar scenes and it played like a tighter movie. I mean, I think anyone with, basic comprehension of iMovie could probably deliver a 75-minute version of this movie, and it would go down a lot smoother. I wouldn't say it would be good, but it would go down a lot smoother. And I think it really, it's kind of like, too, like I just watched Terrifier 2, and it's a slasher movie in the 80s kind of style, but like it's 138 minutes. There's no reason for a slasher movie to be 138 minutes. And there are some really good stuff in it, but like you said, like when you look at the slider bar and you got a half an hour more than you bargained for, the director really needs to kind of deliver. And neither Terrifier 2 or Pups Alone really did that. And it's just kind of I look at all the movies that I have on my shelf right now that I haven't watched. I looked at all the movies on my like Tubi account that I haven't watched. I'm like, I could be watching, two crappy Jim Wynorski movies or something like like the 60-minute full moon movies or something when it takes up to two full moon movies just to equal one Pups Alone. I'm like, God, I could have really put a dent in my Tubi account right now.
Yeah, because that's a really great point. Because the last time that you were on, we talked about the film Pig with Nicolas Cage, and that movie was like about an hour and a half. But in the trivia, it said the original runtime was 2.5 hours, and the distributors wouldn't touch it at 2.5, so they cut it down. When you think of that movie at an hour and a half, it did everything it needed to do, did it really well. There was no real down spot. And in fact, because it was almost like whenever there was a down moment, the down moment was really just sort of giving us a breather for the next tense moment. And even sometimes I think with Pig, there were moments where we thought we were taking a break that we were actually, no, we were getting into something tense. And so it does get into that point that like, movies, I don't know, it feels like movies always have to be bigger. Like John Wick is another example where the first John Wick movie is like about 100 minutes long, something like that. 100. And then the next one's 2 hours, 2 hours and 2 minutes, or something like that. And then the next one's 2 hours and 10 minutes. And, the first movie takes place almost exclusively in like small set locations that are supposed to be New York and New Jersey. The second one goes to Rome. And then the third one, he's like traipsing around the desert in Morocco and all of that stuff. And it's like, there's this feeling of every movie's always got to be bigger than it really necessarily has to be.
Well, you look back at Fistful of Dollars for a few dollars more than The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. Well, I mean, yeah, those movies grow exponentially, but they're worth it. They deliver, and like every time I watch Good, the Bad, the Ugly, I know it's 3 hours, but I know there's going to be no points where I'm looking at the display button on my DVD remote. I'm going to be watching that sucker. And Pups Alone, I think I first hit it like the 17-minute mark, and I honestly thought I was like 40 minutes in.
That's the same thing.
And me and my daughter looked at each other. She's like, I got to go to bed. Like it was putting her to sleep. And it's just, it's, like, yes, filmmaking's hard. Filmmaking is the toughest thing to do, and they say every movie is a miracle, just to get it written, produced, filmed, edited, and distributed. Having said that, this is bad.
Yeah, it just right. They went in with the best intentions, and it just didn't work. I think it's and like you said, right? Like I think that's always the thing. Like even with those ones that feel like they're assembly line created, productions with Bruce Willis in for like 5 minutes. Like there's still like a crew that was putting in long hours, having to set things up and do shots and all of that stuff. So I definitely agree with that concept that like there's no neither of us are saying like all of the people who made this movie should be banned from the film industry and we they should never do another thing in Hollywood or anything like that. We're saying this thing just didn't work. But yeah, I mean, I think for me it was like 15:30 or something like that was when I checked the slider bar, which, for me, like, I'm always checking the slider bar anyway, because I'm one of those people just antsy when it comes to movies. Like, my brain is just permanently velocitized, where I just have to watch PM entertainment films all the time, where they're just like, flipping cars every 10 minutes or something like that. So that's my issue, I know. But I also know too that, like, for example, Kindergarten Cop 2, maybe I'm checking the slider bar, but I also was able to sit and watch that in one sitting. Like, I could, it's almost the same long, length of the movie. And I think, again, too, when you were there watching with your daughter, or, the woman who reviewed it for the other site, who said her 5-year-old was playing with his toys and things like that, it's a sign that, it just didn't hit. It just didn't work. And I don't know. I think listening to the podcast where they talked about the kind of piecemeal way that this was created, and almost like they were trying to say it was like a good thing that it was piecemeal, because there was a sense of like, this isn't a David Dakota thing where they just threw it together in a short period of time and cut corners because they had to or whatever. I almost feel like, no, it might have been better if they just David Dakota'd it and just spit it out and got it done.
Well, even if they were working on a television schedule and budget, like shoot in 10 days, 2 weeks or whatever, 9 to 5. But I mean, and think about it like this too. I mean, we've all been, like you said, you watch the Christmas movies as a guilty pleasure. And, sometimes, like, if you're over at the relative's house, or, and they have Hallmark on it, or, you just happen to turn it on, there's a, Hallmark Christmas movie on. And this happened maybe a few days ago. I just happened to turn on, I think, Pluto, and they were playing a Christmas movie. And I'm not saying I got sucked into the movie. I don't even know what movie it was, but it's something about the somebody bought in a small town theater was going to turn into a restaurant, and everybody in the town wanted them to save the theater and all this, but like, okay, like, I can tell you right now what happened in that 10, 15 minutes when it was on in the background, because it was concise. It like, each scene led to the next one. And it's like, I could watch 15 minutes of it, but I could tell you what happened before that and what happened after that and how it probably ended. But there was a basic functionality to the dialogue being delivered, the sets, the placement, the relationships of the characters, and none of that really applied to Pups Alone. Pups Alone was just kind of a free for all in terms of storytelling.
Yeah, because here's the synopsis on IMDb. It's 2 sentences. This synopsis. While everyone is away on a company ski trip, Robert's neighbor hires 2 inept thieves to steal his latest invention. The neighborhood dogs will use Robert's inventions to set up a house of horror for the thieves. That's like the last, that's the last
30 minutes of the movie.
Right, and it's only like 15 minutes of the last 30 minutes of the movie too, right? Yeah. Like it's just one small piece of this movie is this synopsis. And like you said, like, when you think about, like, there's that Dog Who Saves Christmas movie, I can tell you that synopsis really quickly. It's just that, family wants to adopt a dog because there's break-ins in the area, and so they want to have a guard dog. So they adopt a dog from the kennel, but the problem is the dog's afraid to bark, because the dog used to be a rescue dog, and there was a traumatic incident where he barked and got somebody killed. So he's afraid to bark. So anyway, the family decides they're going to rehome the dog, but before they do, they go out to visit in-laws, and while they're doing that, robbers break in, and the dog finally gets his voice and saves the day. That's it. There's the story right there. I wasn't able to do that with this movie, and I still don't think I even covered everything when I was doing my synopsis.
Well, another thing too is, I mean, it again, it goes back to almost like the storytelling device of, like, the from the 50s and 60s. We have the widowed dad. And the only really reason he's widowed is so that the hot neighbor can virtually throw herself at him. because he's obviously the only available male in this gated community of dog technology inventors. And it's almost, I don't want to say offensive, but it's like insulting to your intelligence that one, he has a daughter, so I know it's a movie, but you're gonna like thrust all this trauma of losing your mother just so your dad can score, and he's not gonna even score because it's a kids movie. You know what I mean? It's this storytelling device. It's just outdated. It's like at least have them to be divorced or something, and it's still kind of traumatic, but it's not like, oh, your mother's dead, and like,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I'm out of line with that, but it just kind of is like it's kind of insulting, and that's like the first scene of the movie.
Yeah, and he's definitely no like Fred McMurray or anybody like that,
No.
right? But you're right. It's like it's a very, like you said, it's a traumatic thing, and it's also like the way that, like, I guess they were using it as a device to show why he cared so much about this dog translating device that he was, because they were working on it together when the wife passed. But it's like the idea of a dog translating device in and of itself is big enough that he could be obsessed with it without it having to be tied to the late wife. I agree with you there. I think there was a missed opportunity here too to make it even better if there was an ex-wife, right? That maybe the ex-wife is like, you know what, Robert, you just were so obsessed with your inventions that I couldn't be with you anymore. And so now he finds the perfect woman in the neighbor who is also an inventor, right? So she's going to share that thing. But like you said, you're right. That was so gratuitous too. That it's like, she's walking her dog in cocktail dresses. Like what woman walks their dog in a cocktail dress? Like, unless it's like some kind of absurd concept, like again in that Dog Who Saves Halloween movie, they had Kristen Miller from She Spies. She is supposed to be playing like the town hussy character, and so she walks her dog in cocktail dresses, and it's supposed to be played for laughs. But this was dead serious. Like, this is, this woman's gonna, she's putting on a dress to walk the dog when everybody else would do it like in leggings or sweatpants or whatever. It was a very heavy-handed concept that I think there was, you're right. It was kind of a throwback concept to like those old movies. It was like, it didn't really need to be there.
Yeah, and I guess it really wouldn't matter if the I can't even say that the inventor character is one note. It's almost like a half a note.
Right.
I mean, because he's just so caught up in his work. Like, his daughter, it's doing the, like, we've said this 1,000 times in this discussion, but like, there's 5 or 6 jokes or 5 or 6 lines when only one would suffice. There's like the opening scene where she's getting herself ready and he keeps fiddling with this dog collar, and she keeps saying stuff that, it's just like these non sequiturs, and he's like, great, and it just goes on forever. And it's like, it's just, even when he's somewhat redeemed, like at the end, he just seems more of like a plot device than an actual character that we're supposed to kind of it doesn't even feel like he's the main. It feels like in the beginning he's going to be the main character, but then he really isn't. And then the dogs, I don't know. Like, the whole thing, it just makes my head spin.
Yeah, because there wasn't really any reason why the two of them, why she would go over there and be interested in him immediately. Like,
yeah,
there's no like even situation where like she shows up at the house and they strike up a conversation and realize they have things in common, or he takes off his glasses and looks really debonair. There was none of that. I'm thinking back to Santa's Summer House, where you had the relationship between Daniel Bernhardt and I can't remember the actress's name that was in that, but there's sort of like a tension between the two of them,
right?
Where they kind of almost like a romantic comedy kind of thing, right? Where they don't get along, but they kind of have a thing for each other, and
opposites attract.
Yeah, exactly. And they kind of build into something that at the end, it doesn't even like get fully formed, where like kind of at the end, it's like it could get in, it could move into something, right? It could be something between the two of them. But it definitely felt much more organic than this did, where this was just like, it was like a victim of the editing, I guess, but it was just like, why would she be interested in him? Like they could have even made a joke where she makes it, like where maybe she's desperate or something like that, right? I think like there's not a lot of single guys around, and it's either between her and Dolph's so obnoxious she doesn't want to be with him.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, is just like immediately he shows up and she like almost throws herself at him. I think she actually does. I think she like runs into him while he's carrying a box or something. And I mean, it's I don't know what it's like to live in a gated community full of dog tech inventors. So I really don't know how those emotions can overcome someone, but. I do. I've known some women in my time, and I don't think they just automatically, literally throw themselves at it. And if they do, I mean, I've been hanging out in the wrong gated communities, apparently.
Right. Yeah, because it's almost like the myth of what people think LA is, right? That you would see people
Right.
dressed like that going to walk their dogs, and yeah, it was almost like it had like a Melrose Place kind of quality to it, where it's like Heather Locklear going to like flirt with Jack Wagner or something like that. Yeah, it it was so out, and it was again, it's like they're spending so much time on so many of these other elements of the film that they do almost nothing to build the romance between the two of them. Like it could have been that like she just shows up and maybe she likes the daughter, right? Maybe she has an affinity for the daughter. Maybe her and the daughter hit it off. And they kind of went through some of those things, but never quite enough. But it's like there were scenes where, again, the scene where they're robbing the blind woman could have been 5 minutes shorter. And then maybe you've got a scene where they're maybe the main character is on a date at Keith David's bar with the woman, and maybe Keith David could be like kind of sparking the romance between them. That could have been something funny. Or maybe Keith David puts on music for them or something like that. Like there were elements there that could have maybe made this so not so completely out of left field, but they were spending time with so many other things that they didn't have to.
Yeah, and I mean, like the bartender scene, it's more he's crying the blues to the bartender because he made his daughter upset with him, and it's like you either needed the daughter character to. I mean, that was the only source of tension in the movie was between him and the daughter,
Yeah.
but at the same time there was no tension between him and the love interest. You pretty much knew that wherever he showed up she was going to be and kind of like fawning over him, and it's just like there needed either one or the other, like do the winning your daughter back subplot or do the finding new love subplot. And like kind of going back to what I said, it's like it felt like two episodes of a show where there are these plot threads that start and then go nowhere, and then there are new plot threads in the second half of the movie and then go nowhere.
Yeah, because you make a great point about that too, because right, like in a traditional Christmas movie, those would have been the two main strains, right? It would have been this main character who, of course, he would have been much more debonair than this guy is, right? It would have been, maybe not played by a Brandon Ruth, but maybe like some, lantern-jawed young Canadian actor, right? Would have probably played the love interest instead of this guy that they got for it. I think the actress that they got though, her name is Sarah Lindsay. I feel like I've seen her in stuff before, but when I looked at her IMDb bio, it was nothing that I'd caught. But she probably would have played the female lead. And then the daughter, of course, right? And there's almost like this sense. I think there've been ones like this before where the guy isn't a widower, that he's been divorced and he finds love with a new woman when he's got kids. That they could have probably played into some, but it's almost like they were trying to split the difference between the Christmas movie romance and the Christmas movie Home Alone heist kind of thing, and they ended up getting neither of them.
Right, and it goes back to just kind of just like a basic scene by scene setup. Like these movies are meant to be kind of disposable entertainment, right, but they need to function. Every scene needs to kind of build upon the next one, and like I said, like the random Hallmark movies that you can just stumble onto. You can only watch 5 or 6 minutes of them, but you get a general idea. If I watched any kind of given 6, 7 minutes of this movie, I don't know what the hell was going on.
Right. Right. And even to that point, it's like, yeah, you don't know what's going on. And then also, like, again, some of these scenes are so haphazard. Again, even the your basic Lifetime Hallmark Christmas movie, they're going to have scenes that aren't helter-skelter where people are talking over each other. Like there's at least a sense that, like, okay, Dolph Lundgren talks. When he's done talking, Nicholas Totoro talks. When Nicholas Totoro, and we couldn't even get that. I mean, there were moments where the daughter is talking over the father, and they're talking over each other. Or Sarah, even that basic element of filmmaking, I think you get in those Hallmark movies that you weren't getting here.
Right. And I think, like I said, I think there's when they do those movies, they're working on basically more of a television budget. Yeah. 9 to 5, 5 days a week, 2 weeks. They probably shoot out the main star who's the guest star or whatever the first few days, and then they work around. And then they probably have a second unit that does all the shots of the snow coming down and the Christmas lights. And you didn't get any of it. You never got a sense that it was really Christmas either. So I don't. I mean, other than Dolph's sweaters, and I guess the Big Bear Lodge, but like in the cul-de-sac where they live, I know it was L.A., but it still didn't feel like it was very Christmassy at all. And it seems like, like you said, the piecemeal way it was put together probably was a hindrance because there wasn't any sort of immediacy to the editing, and there wasn't kind of like any kind of urgency to the plot.
Yeah, it was just a lot of stuff that was just sort of like, oh, by the way, or let's throw this in here, right? Like, okay, the father, daughter, and the dog move into the new location. Oh, by the way, here's Sarah Lindsay walking her dog and getting, introducing him. And here's Dolphin. Oh, by the way, there's this company event in Big Bear that nobody told you about, but we're going. And like, oh, by the way, we've got someone in the neighborhood who walks all the dogs for us. So you don't have to worry about your dog. It was a lot of these things that just sort of, happened. And I think that was part of it too, is that none of it flowed organically like you'd want. That even a Hallmark movie that, like you said, is like a 2-star, time waster. At least it for the most part, even like Santa's Summer House, for the most part it flowed organically. There were some things that were in there that maybe shouldn't have been. There were some fights between couples that maybe were a little contrived, but overall, I think it flowed enough that it worked, and this didn't flow enough to work.
Yeah, and then like with the pop-up book kind of device, I was like, oh well, that's kind of a cutesy idea or whatever. And then like I said, they just kind of drop it at the end, and then there's like the big reveal of the dog has been the one telling the whole story. But like there's a good 40 minutes where there isn't a pop-up book montage, and they occur really kind of like every few minutes or so in the first half of the film. So it just seemed like they used that to kind of tie everything together, where maybe they didn't get around to filming, or shots didn't come back from the lab on time or something. I don't know, but it just seemed haphazard.
Yeah, and some of those were longer too than they should have been, right? It was like, telling this whole story about the father and the mother dying, and then the father getting into a fight with the grandfather, and them not getting along, which was a contrived piece that I don't think you even needed there to be in there. And the other thing I didn't get too is that they moved away to this other location, but yet the grandfather just happened to be in that location. Wouldn't they've been moving away from him too? So there was a lot of these things that just didn't make any sense. But then, like you said, they were using this storyboard or the storybook thing to sort of paper in the cracks or to fill in the gaps, and even those felt long. It was like, wow, this is a lot of backstory you're throwing at me here that I can't even keep it all straight, let alone do I even need it.
Well, it all goes back to, show, don't tell. It's right. A movie. Show me what's going on. And you know, some narration here and there is acceptable, but it seemed like the narration was only there to, like you said, like, fill in the gaps. And then if you're going to do that, at least kind of pepper it in, make it kind of even, and where they just kind of front loaded the movie with it and then kind of dropped the device until the very end.
Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, I'm surprised we actually managed to get almost about an hour and 45 minutes in on Pups. I was worried that we weren't going to get much out of it. Before
we talked as long as the movie.
I know we kind of went right, exactly, for sure. So, was there anything though that we missed, Mitch, that we were talking about that we didn't bring up?
I mean, just just kind of how a lot of the voice cast was wasted. You hired Danny Trejo to be the kind of like the bad dog of the neighborhood, and he just kind of just. I mean, I'm not spoiling anything to say, he winds up helping the dogs at the end, but it just seemed kind of like it seemed like something Danny Trejo would do. Perform voice work that probably took only like an afternoon, but they didn't utilize him very well, and Rob Schneider was kind of wasted, and Malcolm McDowell. I mean, and there's like, just. I know Malcolm McDowell's got to pay the bills like everybody, but sheesh, man, Clockwork Orange was a long time ago.
Or even Star Trek Generations was a long time ago. So I mean, it's like I remember him on Conan O'Brien talking about that movie because William Shatner was making he was working on a biography or autobiography at that time, and he goes up to Malcolm McDowell after the scene where Malcolm McDowell kills Captain Kirk. And he goes up to one of his tape recording. He goes, "You've just killed an American icon. How do you feel?" And so I always remember him conveying that story to Conan O'Brien and just thinking how funny that was. And that's what I think of with Malcolm McDowell. And you're right. Like here, he's this ragtag terrier dog, just saying lines. Like Jennifer Love Hewitt's in this as well. I mean, Jennifer Love Hewitt right now, she's on a network TV show still, right? I think that 9/11 show, emergency, or I don't know what it was called. I'm thinking of the Shatner emergency 911 now, but she still is on a network TV show, I think. So in her case, like, I don't know what, maybe this was just an easy check for her.
Well, too, I mean, like I said, it was interesting to see who was in front of the camera and who was the voice talent, because you would think Jerry O'Connell and Jennifer Love Hewitt, that's a pretty good get.
Yeah.
If they're in front of the camera, their voices really aren't that distinctive enough to be talking dogs in a talking dog movie. You know what I mean? And it's like, okay, Keith David has one of the most kind of, and on top of being just like a great actor and a great, presence in so many movies, like through the years, he's a hell of a voice actor as well. I could see him being the gruff bulldog almost more than Danny Trejo. You know what I mean? Or like maybe Malcolm McDowell could have been the wise bartender. It seems like, if they had flip flopped some of the people doing the voice work with the people that were the flesh and blood actors, I think it might have made for a better movie. But then again, it would still be up in the air if the filmmaking was as rock bottom as it was.
Yeah, you make a great point about Jerry O'Connell and Jennifer Love Hewitt's voices, because Jennifer Love Hewitt in particular, like I couldn't pick out that was her talking, but also Jerry O'Connell, he affects this almost like Joey Lawrence kind of voice. It doesn't really sound like him either. Like they do something with their voices when they play these dog characters that doesn't sound like them. That was really unique. Like you said, it wasn't distinctive enough. And yeah, Keith David, I think, probably some of the best usage of our tax dollars was when he was used for commercials for the armed forces, because I think those commercials were fantastic. And so, I think of, his voice is, so, like you said, is so distinctive. And he gets one scene in this movie behind the bar where he's supposed to be like espousing wisdom that wasn't really great wisdom. It was just sort of like, oh, hold up your glass and see how clouded it is, and now you can't see things as well as you want. And so I guess he was trying to say that the invention was clouding his view of his family or whatever. But yeah, you imagine this if Jerry O'Connell is the inventor and Jennifer Love Hewitt is the neighbor woman, walking her dog in cocktail dresses. That this is a different movie, right? That that it plays out very differently, right? And I guess maybe part of the reason why they were able to get them was, like you said, it was an afternoon's worth of work. But it is fascinating to see it play out this way, because again, their voice work doesn't really stand out much beyond Danny Trejo's work, and who we had in front of the camera, it was a little bit different.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, like Jerry O'Connell doesn't sound like Jerry O'Connell, and I mean, Jerry O'Connell doesn't have the most distinctive voice, but I could, you would be able to pick him out. Like if I looked on IMDb, oh yeah, that's Jerry O'Connell. Right. And there's points in this movie where I thought they were doing like a Steven Seagal, getting some other guy to dub over the voice. Where I was like, is that even Jerry O'Connell? Like, and there's some points when you're like, which dog is talking? Because they just line up all the dogs, and it's like, I guess some of the Rob Schneider voice dogs are like, just kind of sound the same. So I'm like, hey, which dog is saying what now?
Right. Because that was an issue too. I was just looking up Jerry O'Connell, and actually it looks like he's been doing a lot of voice work in DC movies. So like Justice League cartoons, Batman cartoons, things like that. So that might have been where he fell into this role, was that they just said, hey, this is some quick voice work for you. But yeah, I mean, you think of him in the 90s, right, that he's sort of this leading man kind of character. He's on Sliders, of course. He's in Jerry Maguire as Cush. That kind of like this known character. Mariah Carey video. And Jennifer Love Hewitt is kind of the same thing, right? She's a 90s star, even though in her case, I mean, she did, make her way into a network TV show currently. So it's interesting that we're kind of just getting them doing this voice work like this. I have to believe that there was a thought that this was going to turn into a franchise, the way The Dog Who Saved Christmas turned into this franchise that had like 7 movies, that they thought they could do this. And I guess if you're Jennifer Love Hewitt or you're Jerry O'Connell or Danny Trejo, like, 7 movies of, 7 afternoons of your time. And if it's tens of thousands of dollars you're making for 7 afternoons, maybe it's worth it, I guess.
And you have to wonder too, if any of the voice actors ever saw footage of the actual film.
Right. Probably not.
I know sometimes, like if they're trying to match lips or something, which they don't, they just show the dog and just have the dialogue over top of it. So there's a part of me that like you said, like he might have been doing some other voice gig, and they said, oh, by the way, do you want to make an extra $75 or something, and gave him these lines or whatever the going rate is. But like I can't imagine. I mean, it's not to the level of like the Eric Roberts Talking Cat, where it's obviously like on his cell phone or something, or through Skype. Yeah, it's just not this like adequately leveled out sound with the rest of the soundtrack. Right. But that's what kind of gives that movie its charm, and like the way that they terribly like moved the lips. So where they didn't even bother with this one. So it just seems like every choice that they made for this movie was just wrong or foolhardy. I mean, yes, having Dolph in the villain role, that makes it notable, but that's about the only feather in its cap, I think.
Yeah, and I just realized something too when you mentioned the talking cat, that I think I may have confused the talking cat with the cat from outer space when I was talking about like McLean Stevenson or were we talking about the cat from outer space earlier?
It was talking cat, but yeah, I knew what you had meant when you said the cat from outer space. Yeah,
yeah, I'm kind of known for doing that on this podcast because I did. I remember Ty and Brett were talking about They're talking about the movie Rules of Engagement. And I was like, oh, is that the one with James Vanderbeek? And they're like, no, that's Rules of Attraction. So yeah, so I guess you kind of went with it, so that was good. But when you said it this time, I was like, because the Talking Cat, I haven't actually I saw that there's a Riff Tracks version of it on Tubi.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't watched the Riff Tracks version. I actually, I think that was one of the first movies I ever like streamed through Netflix. I think I watched it on my computer, and it was, I mean, it was typical of what, was offered like in like, Netflix streaming like, 10 years ago or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, if it wasn't Dakota and Eric Roberts, it wouldn't have been, I wouldn't have been watching a Talking Cat movie.
Right. Well, because what did they joke? So I think it was on the on Riff Tracks. They joked that it looks like he has an anus in his mouth that's talking, like or something like that. 'Cause the slip that they used it for the, which is it is a fascinating device, right? Because that's always a question too with these talking dog movies or these talking animal movies. Is it better to mimic the talking? Is it, maybe have the dog eating peanut butter to look like they're moving their mouth while they're saying something? Or is it better to have it, like you said, like the look who's talking thing, where it's just sort of like animals are communicating with each other somehow and humans don't know what they're saying. But this movie, excuse me, this movie went in a completely different path, right? Because it not only just did the voices over the animals, but a lot of cases the animals didn't really seem like they were doing anything that matched what they were talking about or anything.
Well, I mean, there was an opportunity there to kind of bring it all together with the talking dog collar, because
Mhm.
early on they tried to put the dog collar on uh, the dog, and what he's saying is, on the soundtrack isn't what's coming out of the dog collar. So there was an opportunity there to be like, oh, like our dogs are misunderstood. We don't really understand them, and then kind of bring it all together at the end. But by that time there are so many other loose ends and subplots and note plots, and that kind of got lost. I mean, I think that could, like you said, if you're dealing with like a 90-minute Hallmark movie, and that's like your through line, yes, that works. But there is about, an entire season, a television show season of subplots jammed into 106 minutes, and none of them ever got an adequate payoff.
Yeah, and maybe that's the ultimate downfall of this movie. I mean, a big piece of the problem is that the jokes don't land. I think that's like one major piece. But I think like like we're talking about here is it sounds like they just tried to do too much with this movie. That they had too many stories going on. They tried to make something too big. That sometimes you just got to go in with the David Dakota mindset of just like I'm banging this out in 3 days. The script is easy. We're gonna do one or two locations and that's it. And I think this movie tried to be too big for that, and I think sometimes too big when it comes to a talking dog movie. That's probably like maybe that's the lesson to be learned here, that there's no need to go too big on a talking dog movie.
Yeah, just stay in your lane, know your role. Uh, just it just seemed like, maybe like you said, three screenwriters, maybe too many cooks. Uh, the uh, the shoot was kind of parceled out, maybe a compact shooting schedule, and maybe just stick to your premise, stick to the dogs foiling a robbery.
Exactly. Yeah, maybe that's a good place for us to leave this conversation because I want to, while I have you here, and we're doing essentially a Christmas movie. I want to bring up your favorite Christmas movie again because it's been a couple years since we've had you on to talk Christmas movies, and I want to kind of mention Elves while we're still here.
Oh yeah, I can talk about elves all night. What do you want to talk about?
Well, because I think I think it's available on YouTube, but it is because I watched it not long after I think I had you on right after I kind of came off my hiatus and we talked about like Marvel, or we talked about like direct to video Marvel movies like Punisher, things like that, I think. And then we did a segment at the end to talk about elves. And I watched it like soon after that. And it is, comparing elves to what we just watched. The only thing about elves that I would say was harder to watch than everything else in Pups Alone was the cat killing scene, which is obviously not really killing a cat. It's just the idea of it for me was too much. But like, there's so much about elves that works that shouldn't work, I guess is maybe the way to describe it.
Yeah, I mean, it swings for the fences. It's the only movie I've ever seen in which, like, there's a Nazi conspiracy to uh, mate a virgin with an elf to bring about the Antichrist, and it's the only movie I've seen that rips off both Dawn of the Dead and Chinatown.
Yeah.
Uh, it's the only movie I've seen where Dan Haggerty is the fresh out of AA ex detective department store Santa hero. I mean, it's one of those movies that just it has it all. And it's one of those movies too, like we were saying, like, kind of with Altitude, it has that X factor. It's like there's a lot of craziness going on, but there's something in there that nobody ever counted on. And it's just this kind of world building, just kookiness to it. And unlike Pups Alone, like it every scene kind of builds to the next, and it gets crazier and crazier as it goes along. I mean, you have mutant elves castrating department store Santas. I mean, you have it's just you have probably the worst body double in history for Deanna Lund, who has a great bathtub death scene. I mean, you got classic dialogue like, "What evil forces? Who's going to destroy me?" I mean, it's just like it's just a perfect movie. And if ever I was in charge of a boutique physical media company, that would be like Spy Number 001. That would be our launch title, because I think part of it, I know it's on YouTube, but like a lot of the kind of mystique about that movie and why it's not as kind of like heavily talked about as like a Silent Night, Deadly Night, or Black Christmas, or any other kind of annual Christmas favorites, is that it is kind of hard to see. It's only been on video. It's never been on DVD. But hopefully, with it being on YouTube, it'll gain a bigger cult following. I've been watching it December 23rd every year since I think 1992. That's been like our Christmas tradition, and it's just like I said, it's just a perfect movie.
Yeah, now I haven't gotten around to reviewing it yet, but it does have 42 critic reviews, which for a movie like this that came out in the late 80s, an AIP film, low budget, that isn't on anything other than, the YouTube version of it. The fact that it has that many external reviews, I think, is a sign of the popularity that it has, that it should have a physical media release. I think for me that's a definite. I saw that the guys at Comeuppance did it, which I think a big reason why they did it is it's got Dan Haggerty, which my favorite scene with Haggerty, one of my favorite scenes, I guess there's a lot of good favorite scenes with Haggerty in this, but I love it when he becomes the department store Santa, and he's hanging out at he's sleeping at the department store because there's no place to stay because he's a disgraced police officer. And the main character is a teenage girl who works at the department store, and she's having her friends there to party. And he kind of goes downstairs and sees them at the party, and it's kind of this sort of gruff, like, "All right, you kids, just do whatever you're doing and get at it." Kind of like, like he's the adult in the room, but he doesn't want to be the adult in the room. And I just love that concept because I can see myself in that person now. I mean, I'm not much younger than Haggerty was when he made the movie, which is kind of crazy to think now, right? That we're getting up there to that age that Haggerty was as Santa Claus. And I could see myself in a similar situation. I mean, I hope I'm not in a situation where I'm so down on my luck that I've got to sleep in a department store, which because one, it's not going to be a good situation now because a lot of them are closed, and so you're going to be like at a Target or something. But two, like I could see myself if kids were partying at that department store, just being like, all right, listen, just keep it down and don't break anything, like I'm not gonna tell on you, even though I'm the adult here. And I guess it was that realization too for me that I would be the adult now in that situation, that I'm no longer the teens partying that Dan Haggerty has to tell to keep it down. And that for some reason that piece, I mean, just the whole Dan Haggerty element of this movie, it just adds a piece that's on top of Nazi created elves and like incestual relationships and all this other stuff that's happening in it. Dan Haggerty as Santa is just another fantastic piece of it.
And two, like that scene before that, there's like the whole rigmarole with putting duct tape on the lock of the door so they can come and go freely through the mall and or the department store. And it's like there's like a good 7 or 8 minutes devoted to duct tape. And that level of who has the duct tape, when has the door been duct taped, when has it not been duct taped, who can enter and who cannot pass, that is filmmaking beyond anything in Pups alone, because we always know who is not going to be able to get into or out of the department store. And like I mean, Hitchcock would be very hard pressed to like move all those pieces of the chessboard, the cinematic chessboard, as accurately as Jeff Mandel did.
Right. And it's a fascinating thing too, because the concept of the small town downtown department store, even of itself, is gone now, right? That like
Right.
so many of those have been run out of business. And I remember as a kid there was one in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I think it was Newberry's or something like that. I can't remember, but I remember going there as a kid. You'd park the sort of the diagonal angle parking, and you'd go in, and there's usually a counter, which I think in this movie, I think in Elves, the main character, I think she works at the counter. Or she works like that, kind of right, because it's donuts, right? Doesn't she serve donuts there?
Well, she works in the restaurant part of the store, which is another thing that they don't really have.
Yeah.
That's kind of gone by the wayside.
Yeah, and so even that element of the movie, like you said, when they go into like the detail about the duct tape and who can get in and who can get out, it's an element of that kind of movie that you can't do anymore. Right nowadays, there's no stores like that in downtown areas, right? They're all big chains, big box chains that are located out in the suburban areas, kind of on strip mall, plots. But then also the company has a very sophisticated security system that everybody's got to type in and do and all of that kind of stuff. So it's the fact that they even needed to go through the detail about the duct tape is in and of itself sort of a piece of nostalgia.
Right, and it's funny because I know there are like some younger moviegoers I've seen on either Twitter or here and there online that say like, well, I can't even watch a movie unless they have cell phones or something, because and it's just so funny how like that movie to us, that brings us nostalgia, and it would seem like the Stone Age to a lot of younger viewers.
Yeah, because the entire concept of what happens in Elves, right? It's the I think for a lot of younger people, they don't remember, and it's not like I remember it very well, but I remember it well enough that I remember sort of where I grew up in my, where the mall became the end all, and it kind of it sort of destroyed all the downtown businesses. And then people got sick of the mall, and the downtown area opened up all these boutique businesses that ended up running the mall out of business. Like it's kind of that process happened. But then in between, right, you get the Walmarts and the Targets and all of those things that encroach on both of them and sort of fill that need. And so there isn't a place. I mean, yeah, I mean, even just the idea of eating at a department store, right? Like, I mean, I guess now Target has a Starbucks in it, right? So I guess you can go sit in the Starbucks and have a bite to eat, or McDonald's, right? There's a McDonald's and a Walmart, but it's not the same as like, going to the Kmart in the back of it and getting a grilled cheese and chips, and, a bunch of old ladies are, smoking cigarettes and waiting for the next blue light special or something like that.
Yeah, it's definitely sitting on the stools and like the '50s diner counter. It's a very kind of distinct kind of thing that they just don't, like you said, there are versions of that still exist, but not that version.
Yeah, and it's funny because thinking about how long you've been watching elves as a Christmas tradition, it's sort of almost like the evolution of retail throughout that entire period, right? Which I didn't really consider before when you mentioned how long you've been watching it, but there's sort of you've kind of been watching this each year, and with each year, like the nostalgia factor for some of the elements of the film have kind of grown over time.
Well, that's funny you mentioned that because our big mall, which is kind of, just kind of barely hanging on right now, especially after COVID, like that was the new mall. I think they opened like 91, like the year or two before we started watching Elves. So yeah, this is a very interesting insight because now like I said, when we watched it, pardon me, with my daughter last year, and she was kind of like, she kind of likens it to almost like a Boscov's, or which they a lot of the malls have like that kind of anchor stores, but not like you said, like going downtown and parking and walking to the to the big department store. It that like you get versions of that like a Target or Walmart, but you don't get like I guess we had like Leggett and Hess and places like that.
Yeah, because I mean, here in Philadelphia, they still have the Macy's downtown. But the thing with talking to my wife about that, because she grew up here in Philadelphia, where I've just moved here about 8 years ago. That Macy's, which is actually the Wanamaker building, which is where a good portion of Mannequin was filmed. So you can go in there and kind of see locations where things happen in Mannequin. But she was talking about like the different brands that were in that location, and it was like one of those things where Macy's just eventually they were buying up so many companies that they just eventually bought it and have it. And so now it's a Macy's there. But that's even like the thing, right? Is that like not even a chain downtown. The idea of it being like that you had department stores that weren't chains, that were just their own thing before they would all either get run out of business or bought out. It's like it's a concept that, yeah, you don't think it's like when you watch a movie like Elves, like I don't even really think of that kind of thing until I watch a movie like Elves, and I'm like, yeah, I remember that. Like there's no points where you even remember that existed. That I would, my mom we would go downtown to a department store, and even then my mom was not going to that place. Like she was like, no, I'm going to Kmart instead, or I'm going to go to Woolworths instead, which that even went out of business. And I remember she stopped going to the Woolworths because when I was in kindergarten, my sister was a little bit younger, was in Woolworths with her, and I guess a clerk yelled at my sister, and I was like, well, I'm not coming back in here ever again. And so, of course, that's the thing, right? When you say you're not going to go into a store again, you just wait until it gets bought out by somebody else, and it becomes something new eventually. But yeah, because it's like there's so many crazy things about Elves, and then it's like I'm kind of like fixated on the retail aspect of it, I guess.
Well, so much of the story takes place in the store.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, a character unto itself. And, there's like the little whiny manager guy who, anything bad happens, he said, there hasn't been anything like this happen in Golems in 50 years. And they say it enough, and you're like, well, I wonder what happened 50 years ago. Right. And then when you start thinking about it, it's like, well, 50 years ago would have been the 40s. And then would that have actually been the grandfather with the Nazis? And, yeah, it kind of works out. Like, were they doing their experiments in, the aisle of the, the ladies' boutique aisle in Gollum's department store? So I think there's room for a prequel there. Like, I have my theories. Like I said, I've seen it now for 30, going on 30 years. So I do have my headcanons and my fan theories about it.
Yeah, it's another great point because that was a thing too, right? In the 80s, was that, I mean, you had like Chopping Mall is a great example, but you had movies, especially horror movies, that took place in shopping locations, and it was a great thing because you could just get your hands on anything you needed, right? So it's like, Haggerty's got to take out this elf demon thing, and he's got guns in the sporting goods section, or he whatever he needs in the space there. And it's also a fun aspect of the movies that I guess, yeah, just thinking about a movie I watched recently, Black Friday, that was shot in an old Babies R Us in Massachusetts. And that movie doesn't quite use the space. And I mean, I was trying to think of why the movie wasn't working as well for me as it should have. I mean, it did work. It was a fun movie. But I kind of think that Elves used the space even better, I think.
Well, yeah, it said with the guns, it says gifts for mom. I mean, there's even like a tongue-in-cheekness about it that, it's kind of a winking at the audience, but it creates so many kind of just its own kind of crazy internal logic that you can't help but love it.
Yeah. I mean, just like reading somebody's synopsis, they refer to Dan Haggerty as the renegade loose cannon Santa Claus. I mean, again, it's not something, we talk about how Dolph was in the movie we just watched, and he's dressed up like Santa and he's doing some goofy stuff. But I mean, Haggerty in this film he's just essentially like an action lead who's like kind of down on his luck and dressed as Santa Claus, who ends up like kind of falling into this fighting elves thing that was just so, and he plays it so well that it's like another element of it that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a genuineness to it and a heartfelt. The way he delivers his lines, it's just so genuine and like really kind of moving. Actually, I mean, there are some scenes where it's almost downright touching. I mean, he brought his A game to a movie about killer Nazi elves, and it's just a terrific performance.
Yeah, that's the best way to describe it. And when you go to his IMDb page and it says the known for, and it has 4 movies, Elves is number 2. Big Stand is number 1, I guess, a movie with Rob Schneider. But speaking of Rob Schneider, but Elves is number 2 on his list of what he's known for, which I think is fantastic. That it's that, because it's not like these what was it like that he did the Grizzly Adams movies?
Yeah, that was his
thing. Yeah, or the TV movies, all that stuff. I mean, yeah, the fact that it's elves, I think, is a sign of how big Elves is and why it needs the like you said, like the Vinegar Syndrome, one of those companies is to release it.
Yeah, like you said, if I ever had my my own boutique label, that would be Spawn number 1. I would be if anybody is thinking of releasing Elves on home video, I would definitely be available for film commentary. We could bring a camera crew to the annual Elves viewing. We could, I would be available for on-camera interviews, set walkthroughs. We could find the old department store, and I could do a on-location kind of guide. I mean, I'm totally game for it.
Yeah, I would love to see. I mean, I think that's one thing that I would watch the movie if they had you do the commentary. I think that would be fantastic to watch and have your commentary for it, because it kind of would add an element to the movie. I think that again, if it's like a nice transfer, and then we've got your commentary kind of going over certain pieces of it, like you said, like like the gifts for mom and the gun section, those kinds of things, I think would just enhance the film that much more. So yeah, anybody who's listening to this, especially if you Ty and Brett, whenever they're on, we always talk about like movies that we think Vinegar Syndrome should be releasing. And I think even we talked about, I think Mill Creek put out the Andy Sidaris films, but again, having that kind of high quality Blu-ray, I think there's enough people. If this thing has 42 critic reviews and it's the number 2 movie for Dan Haggerty's career, it's got enough interest that I think if they put this out on Blu-ray next Christmas, it would be sold out immediately. I think if they, Vinegar Syndrome put out 400 copies, they would sell immediately.
Well, I think the problem with Vinegar Syndrome is they only do movies that are on film.
Right.
and they preserve, they're big in film preservation. And I think it was shot on film, but it was edited on video, which kind of gives it that kind of weird hazy look that's, that which is kind of very unique to that picture. And I think I'm pretty sure that is the holdup. And I think in order for them to do it, they would basically have to recut the entire film frame by frame, and I think it would just be a big headache. But any other company, even if it was just a DVD release, I mean, like I said, I watch so much crap now. It's like, even on Tubi, like a lot of the stuff on Tubi is just a VHS rip.
Yeah.
And honestly, does it really need to be cleaned up? I kind of like it the way it is.
Yeah, I mean, you think of those Godfrey Ho movies, like when we were talking about the Godfrey Ho films. I mean, they don't need to be cleaned up. They're, and a good chunk of those are on Tubi, and yeah, they do the trick.
And it might even lose something. It might lose that kind of hazy quality that makes it just like, I think only one movie looks like that, and it's Elves. And it's just it's just this otherworldly kind of gloss to everything, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
No, and I was kind of, one thing I think when I watched Pups Alone and realized it was going to be a dud when I was watching it, that we were going to, I was kind of glad having you on again, I think for a Christmas movie, to be able to chat about Elves again, because I think it's definitely one. I mean, I think in terms of like the company that you're watching it with, keep in mind the fact that there is a scene where the mother kills the daughter's cat. She drowns it in the toilet. It's kind of one of those things where she just like kind of puts a stuffed animal in the toilet, and you hear like a wow kind of thing. So there's that scene, and then there's the idea that the daughter has like an incestual relationship, I think, with her grandfather, right? Is that what it is? To have the baby or something. Or maybe it's her father.
The mom.
Oh, right.
And the grandfather produced the virgin suitable with the suitable bloodline that would be suitable to mate with the elf.
That's right. That's with that. Yeah. So those might be dark for mixed company. So just know who you're watching the film with. But I think if you know that the people you're watching the film with will kind of get past that for all the other great parts that we're talking about. This is definitely, like you said, it's a Christmas tradition kind of thing. Like I've been finding it on YouTube since you brought it up when you were on the show. I've been watching it, and I can't believe I haven't reviewed it yet. I don't know why that is. I need to. Maybe I thought I did, and that's why I haven't, because I thought I'd put a review out for it. But it's like you said, it's worth the Christmas tradition. This is a fun. It's dark in places, but overall, I mean, again, we were talking about a movie that's Nazi experiments creating elves. With Dan Haggerty as a loose cannon Santa Claus, it doesn't get much better than that.
And the fact that there's only one elf and it's called Elves. I mean, what more? I mean, it's just like I said, like I've watched it almost 30 times, and I still find things to love about it. And I'm happy to bring more people into the cult of elves. I think it's one movie that definitely deserves a big cult. And yes, the cult is growing, but we demand more followers. And so if anyone within the sound of my voice, watch Elves, because it's just a Yuletide tradition.
Yeah. Well, just to give you an idea, I mean, 42 critic reviews. Pups Alone only has 3, which again, critic reviews aren't everything, but Kindergarten Cop 2 had 33. So again, I think a movie like Elves that comes out in the late 80s, an AIP production that's only on VHS and now really only on YouTube, because to find one of those used VHSs would be a huge coup. I don't know. I did notice, since it was reviewed by the guys at Comeuppance, I wonder if they have a VHS copy. And I'm assuming you must have a copy of it, right?
Yeah, I had. It was funny. One year, when my brother was going to rent it for me, and he said, just out of curiosity, can you see when the last time this was rented? And the lady brought it up. She's like, well, yeah, your family rented it last December 23rd. He goes, oh, And then she's like, yeah, your family rented it the December 23rd after that. And it's we were the only one, and like he was like, well, can I just buy it? And they're like, yeah, because you're the only one renting it. So that was my Christmas present one year. So so I mean, it was funny. I don't know how far their ledger went back, but there's a possibility that I was the only one renting elves from the video store back in the day.
That's awesome. I remember my friend and I, we were obsessed with Bad Taste, the Peter Jackson movie. And
Oh yeah.
I remember we were recording it. We were renting a VCR so we could make our own copies of it. And I remember we reserved it. And the people at the video store thought that was hilarious that we were reserving Bad Taste because we were the only people renting it. And so, yeah, so it's kind of funny with those old video store stories like that, where you get those kinds of movies where it's like you find one in there and you just rent it all the time, but nobody else is touching it.
Well, and I think too that's kind of the sense of community, like, having friends over, to watch a movie like Bad Taste. I mean, the more people you have to watch that, the better. Um, and Elves is the same way because, I mean, it's a laugh riot. I mean, for years I've wanted, hope that maybe riff tracks or somebody would, riff over it, and I don't know if it would lose anything because it already kind of weird and funny on its own terms.
Yeah. Yeah, you make a great point with that because I'm so like certain movies like Cool as Ice was fantastic with the riff tracks. Like the riff tracks version of that was really great. But Samurai Cop, I remember watching that one with the riff tracks, and it was funny, but it was almost like it didn't need the riff tracks, like you said. And so yeah, Elves, because Elves is kind of in that Samurai Cop category of I don't know if it's Ty or Brett from Clumps. They have that expression, one of those kinds of movies. It Elves is in that category of like this sort of like cult thing that's just it's so out there but so much fun that I think you might be right that it might not be necessary to be riffing on it.
Well, too, it's like when I saw they recently had Return of Swamp Thing in the theaters, the riff tracks.
Yeah.
And it's funny, yes, and I'm glad I got to see Return of Swamp Thing in the theater, but it's a Wynorski movie, and he's already kind of got the in jokes and kind of the comic relief stuff. So to have Mike, Kevin, and Bill kind of chirping in, it's funny, but the movie kind of already does that for itself.
Yeah, that's a great point because when we were discussing that movie, we were talking about Wynorski. I think it was Wynorski and Olin Ray. We were talking about both, but when we talked about Return of Swamp Thing, it was kind of like a lot of the send-ups he was doing to like old '50s horror films, and yeah, there was a major tongue-in-cheek aspect to the film already that it's not quite like Catalina Caper, which I thought was kind of a genius approach that MST3K did to that because that was a comedy and they were able to riff the comedy. Whereas I think you're right. I think Wynorski kind of nails it so much that it's almost like, what are you making fun of?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think sometimes riff tracks is a mixed blessing because, Mystery Science Theater, with a few exceptions, exclusively riff bad movies. Yeah. And, sometimes when riff tracks gets a hold of kind of the current hits or, movies that we wouldn't really kind of consider bad, it's kind of a toss up whether it's going to work or not. And I mean, yes, they're all, I haven't watched the riff tracks where I haven't laughed or anything, but I think sometimes if they kind of stay in the lane of, crazy schlock, I think that's when they're best in their wheelhouse.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when you talk about something like an Elves, it's like, I mean, there could be, I wouldn't be surprised that there could be like some jokes about Dan Haggerty that they could make that we wouldn't think of that would be hilarious, or jokes about the elves or anything like that we wouldn't think of that would be hilarious. But I think you're right too that this is not necessarily a movie that needs that. Like it's almost like you don't even need to necessarily rip the movie. You just need to like enjoy it and get a kick out of it.
Yeah, and I think we really have our own kind of set, almost like Rocky Horror Picture Show. We holler out lines and during it, and we know when all the big scenes are coming up. So it's more I think of a like a Rocky Horror experience.
Yeah.
I'm not dressing up like Dan Haggerty yet, but at some point, I could let my beard grow out a little bit and get a little bit more gray in there and slap on a Santa suit. But I think, like I think, they're just some one of a kind movies. Like, and I would put Plan 9 into the conversation. That what they were really trying to do was to really try to make a good movie that had a lot of goofy elements in it.
Yeah.
And they succeeded. And it's those goofy elements that kind of elevate it to kind of a work of demented genius. Because, like I said, very few movies combine Santa and elves and Nazis and Dan Haggerty. And the fact that they do it with a straight face, like I said, there's some winking, but like that to me works better than something where they're kind of where do you put jokes into that? I mean, it's funny to begin with.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, one of the things you mentioned about dressing up like Dan Haggerty, on his IMDb page, one of the pictures is of him in the 70s on Battle of the Network Stars. So like that's like those are the kind of jokes that maybe like the guys at Riff Tracks could make those kinds of jokes. But again, too, like, are those going to land for everybody either? And again, like, do you even need, like, that's the thing about Dan Haggerty, right? Is we know who he is. And so we don't even necessarily need to make fun of him, right? Like and I guess there's the fact too that Dan Haggerty, the fact that he plays it so straight and gives such an earnest performance in this movie takes it to a level that, again, doesn't, you wouldn't expect with something like this.
Well, yeah, I mean, if he had been like making wisecracks and jokes and stuff, it wouldn't have worked. But like I said, when he makes that touching monologue, like talking about his dog pea shooter who died, when he was a small boy. I mean, you don't know whether to laugh or cry because he just on the nose. And then when he's delivering the tough guy dialogue, like is that elf yours? Like, I mean, like it. I mean that alone is funnier than any kind of like, oh, you're a Nazi. So like if he had made a quip, like a Dirty Harry quip or something, to me, it's just it works because we believe Dan Haggerty's performance.
Yeah, it's almost like he steps into this thing because of the situation with the daughter, where she's got the mom who's crazy, the grandfather who turns out to be her father, who's also out there, and all of this. And it's almost like this poor girl is like, struggling for some sort of adult figure in her life. And Haggerty almost like he puts himself in that role and says, man, imagine if I was this guy and here's this girl crying out for like a father figure. He like puts that into the role in a way that like that was one major thing I was not expecting in this movie, was him kind of taking on that piece of the role.
Well, yeah, and then there's even like you said, there's he almost becomes Santa at some point, because I mean that's what we would expect Santa to do, would be to not only deliver gifts but to protect the good little girls from Nazis. So it's like the only way to really kind of describe it is just his performance is grounded in a reality of his backstory. Is he used to be a detective. He's a recovering alcoholic. you know, it's all these like cliched kind of cop cliches that we've seen before, but he plays it with like the earnesty of like an Academy Award nominee. I
Yeah.
mean, you take any of those clips out of context and put, you know, Best Supporting Actor nominee Dan Haggerty, and they're an Oscar clip. And I'm being, you know, kind of silly, but yeah, but I mean, that's the level, you know, A game level of acting that he brings to the role.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's something that the movie you wouldn't have expected the movie to have, but because it has it, again, it's like it's just another piece of this thing that, like you said, when you first mentioned it to me about elves, and I don't know why I hadn't seen it yet. I don't remember why I hadn't. I felt like I had when I started watching it. I felt like it was familiar, but I think maybe I had seen it a long time ago, but I don't remember. But when I watched it again, I was just like, I can't believe like the Haggerty piece of this. Like it was like just like another thing that I wasn't, because Nazi elves is that's enough. Like you said, Nazi elf is as it should be in the film. You know, a Nazi elf is enough, right? That's going to get you over the goal line in most cases. And so the Haggerty element as Santa, as the renegade Santa loose cannon cop character, kind of just pushes it over the goal line.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's all these different pieces of a puzzle that maybe shouldn't fit together, but because the puzzle pieces are so different, that's probably why it works so well.
Yeah, yeah, and so maybe it was good that we kind of had this conversation to leave things in a better place. And that again, Pups alone, I think it just didn't land for us, and it is, you know, again, we're talking about the, you know, looking at the slider bar. Elves is not a slider bar kind of movie. It moves at a good pace, and it kind of gets through everything very quickly. So maybe it was good to leave it on that note. But before we wrap up, Mitch, was there anything that you wanted to plug?
Just right now, I'm still depending on what you know Elon Musk does with Twitter. I'm still on Twitter. I don't know if that's going to crash and burn like they say it will, but I'm still on there. Still on blogger.com. You can look at me, Video Vacuum, and Video Vacuum on Twitter, and you can check out some of my books on Amazon.com. You can search my name, Mitch Lovell. My latest one is The Bloody Book of Horror, and I'm working on a Kung Fu book, which hopefully might not be the end of this year, but it'll definitely be in the coming months. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, that would be exciting. So one thing you can do, so it's Mitch Lovell, and Lovell is spelled Lovell. But you can also, I think you have an author page, I think, right? So you can follow the author
Yes.
page. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way to do it, is to follow your author page, because then you'll get the notification when the Kung Fu movie book comes out. But yeah, the Bloody Book of Horror, I think I've mentioned it a few times. You know, we're talking about elves and being a part of people's collections. I think the Bloody Book of Horror, for people, I know, especially horror fans, really like to collect physical media. And I think your Bloody Book of Horror is a great addition to people's horror collections.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I try to I try to give them bite-sized reviews, but still informative, and try to keep enough variety in there where it doesn't feel like I'm repeating myself, or kind of speaking to all kinds of horror lovers, and you know, who love different genres, different eras, different just kind of, you know, trying to cover all the bases while still kind of leaving room for you know, what's new and what's next.
Yeah, and I think, you know, horror is one that's kind of I'm it's underrepresented on my site, just mostly because I think the action stuff is what people seem to glom onto more. It's sort of always been that, because I think that the horror ecosystem is bigger than the action, you know, the low budget action ecosystem. But horror is an area that I've always been a fan of, and I mean, especially a movie like Elves. But you know, I'm kind of more into horror comedies. But I still like, I mean, especially old ones. I love, you know, watching Svengoolie on a Saturday night and just seeing whatever horror movie he shows on there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I love Sven.
Yeah, and I think your Bloody Book of Horror, like you said, it covers a lot of different errors, which I think is fantastic. But it kind of, like you said, the bite-sized element of it, I think it's a great piece to, I think when people are talking about physical media, I mean, your book is cheaper than most, if they're buying the actual physical copy. And I always say, too, Kindle's a good way too, because for us that have books on Amazon, we actually get, I don't know if you're the same as me, we get pretty much the same royalty for a Kindle purchase as you do the paperback purchase.
Oh yeah, it's pretty close.
Yeah, yeah, and so people don't always realize that. And I think the other thing people don't realize is you don't need an actual Kindle to buy to get the book on Kindle. You can put an app on your smartphone or your tablet. It doesn't have to be a Kindle tablet to be able to get Kindle books.
Yeah, I mean they really do make it easy to get it available to you. And like you said, if you get it through Kindle, you don't have to wait for shipping or worry about it being delivered in time for Christmas. It's already right there on your device.
Yeah, you can check it out right there. But also too, I think for those physical media collections that I always see them online. And people have these huge bookshelves and everything like that. For those people, Bloody Book of Horror is a great addition to your already big collection that I'm sure you have.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely, for sure. Well, thank you again, Mitch, for coming on. I know the movie itself was a bit of a grind, but I think we had a good conversation about it, and of course the elves conversation I think kind of helped to cleanse the palate there.
And absolutely, yeah, it kind of got me back into the proper headspace.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again, Mitch, and thanks everybody for listening. And we'll talk soon. Bye, everyone.
Awesome.